The Jacobson family seemed to have it all: wealth, success, and a beautiful home in Wellington, Florida. They appeared to be the ideal loving family. However, appearances can be misleading. Behind the facade of their perfect life lay a much darker reality. What was meant to be a joyful birthday celebration for their two young boys turned into a devastating event, leading to a tragedy so profound that the entire nation would remember their names. To fully grasp this story, we need to go back to 1989 when Neil Jacobson met Frankie at a gym in Bayside, Queens, New York, where they both lived and worked. They are ambitious and successful in their careers. Frankie was making her mark at Lehman Brothers, a leading firm in finance, while Neil had established his own boutique firm on Long Island. They were young, driven, and aspiring to achieve the American dream. Those who knew them praised their relationship as one filled with deep admiration and affection. Frankie was entirely devoted to Neil. In turn, he was seen as a charismatic and kind man with immense potential. Within his family and social circles, he was often regarded as a golden boy, intelligent, charming, and seemingly unstoppable. Together, Neil and Frankie appeared to be the perfect couple. They soon took the next step in their relationship by getting married and moving into Neil's home in New Jersey. Transitioning into married life was easy for them. Together, they created a comfortable, rewarding life filled with shared interests and adventures. They did everything, enjoying activities like biking, scuba diving, and weekend trips to the countryside, which helped strengthen their bond. To an outside observer, their life seemed perfect. However, amidst their seemingly ideal marriage, they felt something was missing: children. They desperately wanted to start a family, but the path to parenthood was challenging. For years, they endured the painful reality of infertility, going through multiple fertility treatments that brought both hope and disappointment. Despite the emotional toll, they remained determined. Finally, in 2003, after many struggles, their dreams came true when they welcomed twin boys, Joshua and Eric. With their lives already comfortable, Frankie and Neil experienced happiness beyond what they had ever imagined. Their family felt complete, and they thrived both personally and professionally. Neil's parents, Harold and Goldie Jacobson, moved from New Jersey to Florida in 2000. Although they loved their new home, they missed being close to their son and his family. They often expressed their frustration about the distance and wished for more time with their grandchildren. In 2005, Harold was diagnosed with cancer, and his health deteriorated rapidly, making it impossible for him to travel to New Jersey. This situation was a turning point for Neil. Being far from his father during such a critical time was too much to bear. He decided to move his family to Florida to be closer to his parents. Before the move, Neil had already started investing in real estate in Florida. He bought a pre-construction condo in Lantana and then a second one shortly after. Real estate quickly became an obsession for him, leading to the purchase of a third condo. Despite recognizing that he was stretching himself financially, he was drawn in by the booming market. Frankie, however, was concerned about his investments and questioned their practicality. Nonetheless, Neil was resolute in his decision and was not willing to change his plans. With his properties piling up in Florida, Neil began pushing Frankie to relocate. She was resistant, hesitant to leave behind the life they had built in New Jersey. She loved their home, their community, and the stability they had created. But as time passed, the financial strain of maintaining their New Jersey home became overwhelming. Eventually, Frankie reluctantly agreed to the move. The Jacobsons officially settled in Florida, eager to start a new chapter close to family. However, things did not go as planned. Neil had hoped to sell their New Jersey home before the move, but the market wasn't in his favor. Just 2 months after they arrived in Florida, tragedy struck. Harold Jacobson passed away. The loss of his father devastated Neil in ways he hadn't expected. He had uprooted his entire life to be closer to Harold, only to lose him so soon after arriving. The grief weighed heavily on him, and his mother, Goldie, later revealed that Neil had struggled with his mental health from a young age. She recalled that as a teenager, he had been diagnosed with obsessive-compulsive disorder, an issue that had plagued him for years. Doctors had noted that Neil had an overwhelming desire to be the perfect child, a pressure that followed him into adulthood. As the years passed, his struggles with anxiety only grew, and soon, things took an even darker turn. The Great Recession hit Florida hard, and Neil, who worked as a mortgage broker. The real estate market collapsed, and the once thriving business that had allowed him to invest so freely was now crumbling beneath him. The financial security he had worked so hard to build was slipping away. As the weight of his losses grew heavier, so did the cracks in his once stable world. The Florida condos he had invested in before relocating were quickly turning into a financial nightmare. Burdened with subprime mortgages, their payments increased month after month, stretching his resources thin. At first, Neil had convinced himself that things would turn around. He had always been a problem solver, always finding ways to make things work. But this time, no amount of determination could keep the walls from closing in. With little to no work coming in, and 4 separate mortgages draining their finances. At first, Neil and Frankie tried to hold on, dipping into their savings to stay afloat. But as time passed, their financial situation only worsened. Bills piled up, debt collectors began calling, and the stress of trying to keep everything together was pushing Neil to his limits. Desperate for a solution, he started making risky financial decisions, one bad choice after another, each one digging them deeper into a hole. He chased after risky investments, sought out loans, all in a futile attempt to stop the inevitable collapse. Eventually, the weight of it all became too much to bear. The financial juggling act had run its course. Frankie was exhausted and drained, made the painful decision to stop paying the mortgages on their 3 Florida condos. It was a move that felt like surrender, but they had no choice. There was simply no more money left to give. By the year 2008, the pressure of Neil's business failures had begun to take a serious toll on his health. At first, it started with minor complaints, aches and pains that he couldn't quite explain, but as time went on, his symptoms worsened. He became sluggish, struggling to muster the energy for even the most basic tasks. His body felt heavy, and his mind clouded. He experienced random bouts of dizziness that left him feeling unstable, and he found himself unable to focus the way he used to. Concerned, he visited the family doctor, who ordered a blood test. In October, the results were troubling. Neil had elevated hormone levels, but there was no immediate explanation for his decline. As the weeks passed, his condition only worsened. The once energetic and determined man was now lethargic, withdrawn, barely functioning. He was eventually diagnosed with depression and transient peripheral vertigo, a condition that further contributed to his constant dizziness. In an attempt to help him cope, his doctor prescribed Zoloft, a common antidepressant. Neil, desperate to feel better, took the medication as prescribed, hoping it would offer some relief. But instead of improving, his mental state deteriorated further. A few days after starting Zoloft, he was called back to the doctor's office, where they added a prescription for Xanax. It was meant to ease his anxiety, but his family and friends quickly noticed that something wasn't right. Instead of stabilizing his mood, the medication seemed to send him spiraling even further into darkness. His paranoia intensified, his emotions became more erratic, and Neil they had once known began to fade before their eyes. Neil's sister, Deborah, became deeply concerned about her brother's rapid decline. She confided in their mother, worried about what he was going through. According to Deborah, Neil had started experiencing terrifying hallucinations. He had grown increasingly paranoid, convinced that someone or something was out to get him. Frankie, his wife, was just as alarmed. She desperate for support as Neil's behavior became more and more disturbing. He had completely withdrawn from the world, he refused to go outside, stopped engaging with friends and family, and even neglected his own hygiene. There were days when he wouldn't even shower, lost in a haze of fear and depression. His paranoia took a terrifying turn when he became obsessed with the idea that the FBI was watching him. He was convinced that federal agents were surveilling him, gathering evidence to have him arrested. He would talk about it constantly, warning anyone who would listen that they were building a case against him. His delusions became more elaborate. He was certain that his phone was tapped, that his home was under surveillance, and that at any moment, the authorities would storm in, take him away. His mother saw the full extent of his paranoia. One of the last times she visited him, Neil pulled her aside, his voice shaking with fear. He told her he was in big trouble, insisting that the FBI was coming for him, that he had done something terrible, though he couldn't seem to explain exactly what. The fear in his eyes was real, raw, and overwhelming. As Neil's mind unraveled, January 23, 2010. The darkness he had been wrestling with for months finally took over, and what happened next would shock everyone who had ever known him. That morning, Neil stood before his wardrobe, fumbling with the top shelf, his hands shaking as he retrieved a loaded gun. His wife, Frankie, still groggy from sleep, watched in confusion, not yet realizing the horror that was unfolding before her. Neil, with the gun in hand, stepped out of the wardrobe, his face hardening into something almost unrecognizable. Frankie's heart skipped a beat as the realization hit her. In an instant, panic took over. She leapt toward him, struggling desperately to wrest the weapon from his grasp. They tumbled to the floor, the fight becoming a chaotic blur of screams, desperation, and tears. In the midst of the struggle, Neil, in a violent frenzy, struck Frankie, knocking out her front tooth and slicing her finger. Despite the brutality of it all, Frankie didn't give up. She fought with all her strength, but Neil was too much, overpowering her in his disturbed state. With cold detachment, he stood, reloaded the gun, and turned the weapon on her. 2 shots rang out one after another, each striking her in the face, silencing her forever. But Neil's twisted path didn't end there, covered in Frankie's blood. He reloaded the gun and made his way to his son Eric's room. Eric, who had been lying on his stomach in peaceful sleep, was the next victim in the nightmare that Neil had somehow constructed in his mind. 2 bullets tore through Eric's body, but against all odds, the boy survived the first 2 shots. However, Neil was undeterred, his mind fixated on finishing what he had started. He grabbed a pillow and pressed it over Eric's face, ensuring his son wouldn't survive. 2 more shots, and Eric was gone. The house was eerily still now as Neil moved toward the next room, where his youngest son Joshua was sleeping. Joshua, blissfully unaware of the carnage around him, lay curled in his sheets. Neil's actions were methodical, almost as if he were following a script. He covered his son's face with a pillow, silencing him with 2 shots to the face. In a matter of moments, the vibrant lives of his family had been extinguished, with the blood of his wife and children staining his hands. Neil walked to the bathroom and turned on the shower. He stood under the water, numb, as if washing away the sins he could no longer escape. When the shower ended, he dressed, swallowed a cocktail of Vicodin and Xanax, in a haze, left his home. As he drove, the pills began to take effect, making him groggy and disoriented. Less than a mile from his mother's house, Neil passed out behind the wheel, swerving off the road and coming to a stop in the grass. Neil had initially planned to kill his mother, next before taking his own life. But in his twisted state, something inside him held him back. He later told the police that when he was at home, standing in the living room, he thought about going to heaven to be with his father, but he couldn't leave his mother alone, so he planned to take her with him. Thankfully, he never made it to her house. When the police found him, Neil was disoriented, barely conscious, and gripping the gun beside him. As they approached, he muttered, "I killed my family," in a dazed and broken voice. The investigation raised many questions. Was Neil a victim of the side effects of his medications, or had he planned this horrific act all along? A suicide note found later suggested that Neil may have been preparing for this moment, leaving many to wonder whether he was driven by his medications or if he had, at some point, simply snapped. His attorney's defense centered around his mental state. They argued that he had been suffering from severe depression, anxiety, and paranoia, all of which had been worsened by the medications he was taking. They described Neil overwhelmed by financial ruin, haunted by the fear that the FBI was watching him, and convinced that there was no way out. His legal team insisted that he had not acted out of hatred or rage but had instead been driven to an unimaginable breaking point due to the side effects of his prescription drugs. To support their argument, the defense brought in medical experts who testified about the dangers of Zoloft and Xanax, the 2 medications Neil had been prescribed before the murders. These drugs, they explained, could cause extreme mood swings, hallucinations, and suicidal tendencies, especially when taken together in high doses. Neil's behavior before the killings, his paranoia, delusions, and refusal to leave the house, was presented as clear evidence that he had lost his grip on reality. His lawyers pushed the narrative that Neil had been a loving father and husband, a man who had never shown any signs of violence before, making it hard to believe that he had killed his family intentionally. But the prosecution had a different story to tell. They painted Neil not as a victim of medication but as a desperate man who had methodically planned the murders. They argued that his financial troubles had reached a boiling point, and that instead of facing them, he had chosen to take his family's lives in an act of ultimate control. They pointed to the way he had executed the killings, retrieving his gun, reloading it multiple times, and ensuring that no one survived. To them, this was not the act of a man lost in a haze of confusion but one who had made a deliberate and calculated decision. One of the most compelling pieces of evidence against Neil was the suicide note found in his home. The note indicated that he had thought through his actions and accepted what he was about to do. It wasn't the frantic scribblings of someone in the middle of a psychotic episode, it was organized, reflective in the prosecution's view, proof of premeditation. If he had truly been unaware of his actions, why would he have left behind such a message? The prosecution also called witnesses to testify about Neil's behavior leading up to the murders. His sister, Deborah, had noticed a dramatic shift in his personality. He had become increasingly paranoid. His wife, Frankie, had confided in Deborah that Neil was no longer the man she had married. He had stopped showering, refused to leave the house, and seemed trapped in his own mind. While the defense used these accounts to argue that Neil was suffering from a mental breakdown, the prosecution used them to show that there had been warning signs, signs that should have led Neil to seek professional help instead of resorting to murder. Neil's mother, Goldie, also played a heartbreaking role in the trial. She had been one of the last people to see him before the tragedy. She recalled how Neil had told her, "Mom, I love you, no matter what happens." The courtroom fell silent. At the time, she hadn't thought much of it, but in hindsight, it was clear he had been preparing for what he was about to do. Goldie, who had always seen her son as a kind and loving man. She struggled to reconcile the Neil she knew with the one on trial for murder. As the trial progressed, the jury was left to decide whether Neil Jacobson had truly been in a state of antidepressants-induced psychosis or if he had coldly and deliberately murdered his wife and children. The prosecution emphasized that Neil had made a series of conscious choices, loading his gun, aiming at his loved ones, and pulling the trigger multiple times. They argued that no matter what struggles he was facing, nothing justified what he had done. The defense, on the other hand, urged the jury to consider his mental state, to see him as a broken man who had been consumed by fear, paranoia, and desperation. After days of deliberation, the jury reached a verdict: guilty on all counts. The judge, while acknowledging the tragedy of the situation, made it clear that no level of financial distress or mental illness excused the murder of innocent children and a devoted wife. Neil Jacobson was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. His fate was sealed, and the courtroom was filled with an overwhelming sense of loss. Neil Jacobson reached a plea deal with the state. He changed his plea from not guilty to guilty of 3 counts of first-degree murder. He stated that the reason was the family's mounting financial situation. Now, he will spend the rest of his life behind bars. Neil Jacobson answered to the judge in the Palm Beach County courtroom, admitting that he shot his wife, Frankie, and then shot their twin 7-year-old sons while they were asleep in their Wellington home back. During the family's turn to speak in court, Neil held his head down and never looked up. Even after the trial ended, many questions remained. Could this tragedy have been prevented if Neil had received different treatment? Were the medications to blame, or was he simply a man who refused to face his failures? No one could say for certain what had driven him to this point. However, what was undeniable was that a mother and 2 young boys had lost their lives in the most horrific way possible. Nothing could ever undo that. Hi everyone, thanks for returning. Let's unravel another horrible case. The case of Sungnam Kwan Lisowski. Our story today focuses on the Lisowski family. John and his wife Sungnam, along with their two daughters, Victoria and Christine, live in a town called Aurora in the United States. John's job requires frequent international travel, including trips to Korea, as the company's headquarters are in the United States while some factories are located in other countries. During one of these trips to Korea, John met Sungnam Kwon. He quickly fell in love with her and asked her out. After several dates, they decided to get married. They married in 1983 and moved to the United States. Their first daughter, Victoria, was born in 1988, followed by Christine a few years later. Although the family seemed perfect, some people found Sungnam too strict with the children. For a long time, John reassured himself that the strict nature of Asian parenting was normal, attributing it to his wife's cultural background. However, as tensions mounted, he began to realize that something was wrong. Sungnam's expectations of the children were too high, too strict, and sometimes even harsh. John's displeasure did not affect Sungnam much. She continued to impose more rules and insisted on their strict enforcement. Notably, the children were forbidden to discuss their family with anyone outside, even their friends. Meanwhile, Victoria and Christine socialized with friends and occasionally visited their homes. During these visits, they found that their friends' parents treated them much more kindly and warmly than the constant criticism they faced at home. While their friends' mothers would bake with them on the weekends, Victoria and Christine's mother decided on their interests without ever consulting them. Every weekend, she woke Victoria and Christine up at 6 a.m. and forced them to practice the piano, scolding them even if they made the slightest mistake. If they messed up, she would hit their hands. Victoria and Christine were never praised. Even if they played perfectly, there was no encouragement. Eventually, Sungnam had to use a wooden stick to discipline them. If they relaxed for a moment or hunched over, they would be beaten by her. John disagreed with this method of education. However, Sungnam achieved results. Victoria and Christine quickly mastered the piano, began to participate in competitions, and even won awards. However, deep down, they did not find joy in their achievements. Sungnam convinced John that her goal was to raise gifted children and that this harsh approach was necessary. Sungnam had a hot temper and would quickly lose control, leading to dangerous behavior. This created a tense atmosphere in the family, where even John felt uncomfortable around her. Sungnam firmly established her dominance in the family and made all the decisions. She often intervened in conflicts, even when she was not directly involved, relishing the role of judge. This situation took place during a conflict between Christine and Victoria. The two children were arguing about something trivial. Christine quickly apologized, but Victoria, the older sister, did not accept it. This made Sungnam unable to bear it. Ignoring Victoria and Christine's feelings, Sungnam became angry. She stood up, walked past Victoria, and began to punish Christine. Christine was confused and did not understand why she was being beaten. Sungnam hit her so violently that Christine's face was left bloody as she slid down the wall, unable to get up. Victoria watched in horror and began to scream an apology, begging her mother to stop. The beating only ceased when Victoria screamed. Sungnam then turned to Victoria and warned her that if she disobeyed again, Christine would be punished. She made it clear that she would hurt little Christine every time Victoria defied Sungnam, ensuring that Victoria would feel guilty about it. Many may wonder why John, the father of the children, did not step in to stop his wife and help his daughters. The truth is that John could not influence his wife. He was also the target of her anger. At the time of this incident, John was working late at the office, trying to avoid the increasingly tense atmosphere at home. This distance made it difficult for him to be involved in his children's lives. By the time John realized that the situation had escalated beyond normal limits, it was too late to intervene. While he was at work, his children were suffering from constant abuse at the hands of their mother. She often assaulted them. John was also involved in a number of disturbing incidents. On one occasion, Victoria went to a friend's house after school. There were obvious injuries on her body, and many suspected that something was wrong in her family, but Victoria remained silent. While she was at her friend's house, the phone rang, and Victoria was called home because something had happened. Victoria braced herself and returned to her house. As she approached, she saw her father standing at the door, talking to the police. He had a large, fresh bruise and a cut on his cheek that looked quite frightening. Victoria overheard her father's conversation with the police. He was making excuses, insisting that he had just fallen and that there was nothing to worry about. However, Victoria understood the truth of the situation. It was clear that after the initial violence, her father had tried to confront his wife to protect the children. Unfortunately, he was severely beaten, and Sung Nam even threatened him with a knife. Since then, she had completely dominated the family. John was too afraid to speak up because he feared for his own safety. Sung Nam's violent outbursts were terrifying. All the family members tried to keep their distance from her. John spent more time at work, trying to stay away from home as much as possible. He built a successful career, becoming the director of a telecommunications equipment company, and often traveled for work. Victoria and Christine followed suit, spending more time at school or with friends to avoid being at home. This situation continued until Victoria and Christine entered high school. During this time, the distance between John and Sung Nam grew. He began working longer hours, taking extra shifts, and often left the house before everyone else woke up. He would wake up early and come home later than everyone else. Unfortunately, Victoria and Christine could not escape this situation. They were still stuck in a stressful environment with their demanding mother. During this time, the cruelty towards Victoria and Christine escalated significantly. One day, an argument broke out between the two sisters. Their mother, Sung Nam, intervened by locking her daughters in a stuffy, dark garage. She forced them to sit with their hands raised for hours. When she finally opened the door, she found Victoria and Christine exhausted from the heat, but Sung Nam chose not to let them out. Instead, she refused to give them water and simply closed the door again. It was later revealed that she had gone to the store, leaving her children in that miserable situation. Victoria and Christine sat for hours in the sweltering heat, feeling miserable but too afraid to go outside, knowing that it would only make their mother angrier. One day, while driving down the street, she lost control of the car, causing Victoria and Christine to bang on the door from the inside. They were confused by their mother's actions. Passers-by noticed her driving erratically, and when they approached, she claimed that the children were late for the bus, justifying her reckless speed. Witnesses described her as unstable, with wild eyes. In addition, Sung Nam flaunted her wealth to make those around her jealous, even though she did not work. All her spending was done with John's money and credit. Sung Nam lost control of her finances to the point that John's steady salary was no longer sufficient. The situation became serious when they faced eviction due to unpaid utility bills and mortgage payments. Despite this threat, Sung Nam had no intention of stopping her spending habits. She continued to buy expensive items and frequented the city's posh clubs. John was unaware of the accumulated debts until it was too late. Sung Nam adopted a reckless lifestyle, spending her evenings at clubs while neglecting her children. When the threat of eviction became a reality, John could no longer bear the situation and made accusations against his wife. This caused her to react violently, leading to heated arguments that eventually escalated into physical violence. She hit John several times, forcing him to retreat to avoid hurting her. Despite his efforts to calm her down, she continued to attack him. In response, he grabbed her arm to restrain her until she calmed down, leaving marks on her wrist. Seeing the situation, Sung Nam decided to call the police. She claimed that her husband was abusing her. She misrepresented the facts, insisting that John had attacked her and that she had to endure constant verbal abuse and violence from him. Sun Nam continued to portray John as abusive and threatening. Finally, Victoria could no longer remain silent and informed the police that her mother had lied. She gave a truthful account of what had happened, as she had witnessed the entire conflict. Victoria explained that her mother had thrown the first punch, and even when John tried to calm her down, Sun Nam continued to act aggressively and threateningly. Faced with these conflicting stories, the police could only leave, suggesting that the family resolve the matter themselves. After the incident, nothing changed. Sun Nam continued to spend the money her husband earned. When John found out about this, he was furious and decided to confront her over the phone. Before the call, he had blocked her access to their accounts. During the conversation, Sun Nam lied and argued. He did not realize the potential consequences of his actions. When Sun Nam discovered that John had blocked her access to all of their accounts, she stormed into his office with a knife, threatened him, and cornered him. Faced with the threat of violence and with his children witnessing the chaos, John felt compelled to unlock the card. After this incident, John threw himself into work, taking more business trips to avoid his wife. To manage the expenses for the children and household bills, he was often away from home. In the fall of 2002, John went on a short business trip to China. During this trip, he met another woman and fell in love with her. John began looking for every opportunity to return to China to be with her and intended to divorce Sun Nam. On September 5, 2002, he emailed Sun Nam to inform her that he wanted a divorce. Although he had been struggling to fulfill his responsibilities as a father, he now wanted to take their children to China to be with his new girlfriend. He had a clear advantage over Sun Nam in that he had a stable income, while she did not. As a result, the ideal life she had tried to portray began to crumble. Sun Nam called John to discuss their personal problems. She was furious after receiving his message, and the news of his decision to divorce shocked her. He confirmed that he intended to initiate divorce proceedings as soon as he returned from his business trip. Sun Nam angrily threw the phone at Victoria, saying that their father wanted to take her and her sister to China. Victoria remained calm, picked up the phone, and told her father that this was a great plan, as living with their mother was unbearable. She expressed her eagerness to leave home and waited for her father to return. Sun Nam was acutely aware of the difficult situation around her. During the Christmas holiday of 2002, John returned from a business trip. At that time, Victoria was 14 years old, and her sister Christine was 12. John was 46 years old, and Sun Nam was 41. While everything seemed to be falling apart, Sun Nam noticed that everyone else was in a good mood. Despite being very angry, Sun Nam did not create any conflicts, which made Victoria and Christine feel uneasy. On the contrary, John appreciated the quiet atmosphere. When John returned from China, Sun Nam had completely changed. She prepared gifts for the whole family, dressed neatly, and decorated the house. She began serving drinks, creating a pleasant atmosphere. Sun Nam placed glasses for everyone and then stepped away to continue washing dishes. Victoria and Christine noticed something white at the bottom of their drinks but did not have time to warn their father before he finished drinking. Realizing that something was wrong, Victoria and Christine pretended to drink but secretly discarded their drinks. When Sun Nam left the room, they noticed that John seemed sluggish after drinking. He said he felt tired and went upstairs to sleep. Although Victoria and Christine had only taken a few sips, they also felt weak. They fell asleep until 8 a.m. the next day, December 25, 2002. Christine and Victoria woke up feeling unwell, not remembering how they had gotten to bed, but at first, there was nothing alarming. Victoria suspected that her mother had put sleeping pills in their drinks, although the reason was unclear. She felt relieved to wake up and find herself alive. Victoria and Christine decided to go downstairs to wish everyone a Merry Christmas. However, before they could leave the room, they heard a loud noise from the first floor that sounded like a gunshot. Earlier that morning, Sun Nam had sneaked into John's office, where he was working. She shot him once in the head from behind and then shot him 3 times in the back. Afterward, she went upstairs and stopped at the door. Victoria and Christine were horrified to see her reloading the gun. Sun Nam begged for forgiveness, saying that she had to do it, then pointed the gun at Victoria. There were 7 bullets left in the magazine. Christine, who had been frozen in shock, suddenly regained her composure. Seizing the moment, she grabbed the phone and called the police. Christine could wait for the operator to answer while Sun Nam reloaded. Christine tried to tell the police that there was a shooting in the house and provided the address. Soon, the police heard a series of gunshots as the call continued. Christine had to run away to escape her mother, who was about to shoot her. She ran into Victoria's bedroom just seconds before her mother opened fire. Christine was injured, but against all odds, both she and Victoria survived. She locked the door and waited for rescue, praying that her mother could not get in. Meanwhile, the patrol officers arrived at the house in emergency mode. Within minutes, they parked outside and heard several gunshots from inside, followed by silence. Unsure of what was happening, the officers cautiously entered the house with their weapons drawn. Inside, they first found John, who had been shot multiple times. Sun Nam shot himself behind a locked door, and she is unconscious. They also discovered Victoria and Christine, wounded but fortunately still alive. All 3 of them were rushed to the hospital. They were seriously injured and needed immediate medical attention. As they began to recover, the police interviewed them to gather information about the shooting. Sun Nam was in worse condition, but Victoria and Christine seemed to have little concern for her. On September 5, 2002, Sun Nam applied for a gun license. It took some time, but by December 17, she had legally obtained a pistol. Over the next week, she practiced target shooting diligently. This preparation suggested that the crime had been planned in advance. Sun Nam confided in her friends about her hatred for her husband and even mentioned her intention to buy a weapon to kill him. However, her friends considered Sun Nam's comments to be expressions of anger and did not believe that she would actually carry out her threat. The attack and Sun Nam's parenting made her friends key witnesses for the prosecution. Their testimony shocked both the jury and the experienced police officers. Sun Nam was sent for a psychiatric evaluation, which determined that she was fit to stand trial. The prosecution argued that Sun Nam had carefully planned the murder and attempted to kill her entire family, proving that she had intent and was of sound mind. Ultimately, Sun Nam Kwan Lisowski was convicted of premeditated murder and sentenced to life in prison with the possibility of parole after 45 years. Victoria and Christine were sent to live with their aunt and uncle. Throughout her incarceration, Sun Nam continued to misbehave and denied all charges against her. In 2008, Sun Nam confessed to her actions, saying that she could not accept the idea of divorce and was desperate to keep her husband, who had chosen to be with another woman. She admitted that she had tried to harm her children because she could not bear the thought of a stepmother caring for them. Sadly, in 2008, Sun Nam took her own life while in prison. Victoria and Christine wrote to her, hoping for a future reunion, but that day never came. Hello again, true crime fans. We've got another mysterious case to explore. The case of John Sweeney. John Sweeney was born on October 13, 1956. He grew up with an older brother and an older sister. People familiar with John's family described his father as a cruel and controlling man. From an early age, John was subjected to his father's strictness and was often the target of physical punishment. Psychologists later identified these harsh experiences as a major factor contributing to John's challenges as an adult. Despite their difficult living environment, John's family was close-knit and working class. His father instilled values of assertiveness and resilience in his sons. However, his methods were harsh, and he may have passed on his authoritarian attitude toward women to John, teaching him that women should always be submissive. Despite these hardships, John developed a strong passion for painting from an early age. At 15, he dreamed of attending art school, but his family did not support his aspirations. Instead, he studied carpentry and specialized in woodworking. This career path left John with a lingering sense of frustration, as he was unable to pursue his true ambitions and was forced to follow a different path in life. John had problems with the police from an early age. As a teenager, he displayed extremely violent tendencies, which led to a number of disturbing incidents. He frequently exhibited aggressive and violent behavior, often targeting his friends. One reported incident involved John getting into a dangerous fight while in high school at a nearby store where he was buying chips. Despite still being a minor, he picked up an axe and swung it aggressively. Witnesses said that, fortunately, no one was injured in the incident. The reckless teenager faced no serious consequences and was only given a warning by the police. By 1974, John had decided to marry. His wife, Ann Bramley, was his neighbor. Together, John and Ann had 2 children, a son and a daughter. Despite Ann's hopes that marriage and family life would calm him down, John remained ruthless, and nothing seemed to change his erratic nature. John's violent outbursts were especially severe when he was drunk. Ann revealed that he often harmed her pets to intimidate her and escalated conflicts by throwing bricks through windows, causing significant property damage. He repeatedly accused her of infidelity, even though she was faithful and gave him no reason to suspect her. Ironically, John himself had no qualms about pursuing romantic relationships with other women. According to family acquaintances, John treated his girlfriends as if they were his property. His first wife, Ann, experienced this firsthand. She described John Sweeney as sweet and charming until his mood changed. When this happened, he would focus on small issues, becoming aggressive and cruel. In these moments, he would easily explode and seem to invent reasons to justify his anger when none existed. After enduring this behavior for 5 years, Ann decided to file for divorce in 1979. However, like many manipulators, John tried everything to convince her to reconcile. Surprisingly, his efforts worked, and the couple remarried in 1981. During this time, John was able to control his behavior, leading Ann to believe that he had truly changed. Unfortunately, this did not last. Soon after they remarried, John's aggressive and uncontrollable behavior returned, and domestic violence once again became a regular occurrence. Before their relationship ended, they experienced another violent incident. One evening, John got drunk and attacked Ann. This event led her to make a firm decision to leave him and not attempt to mend the relationship. However, true to the behavior of a manipulator, John did not let go easily. Viewing his wife as his possession, John began stalking her. After Ann moved into a new house, an incident occurred while she was visiting a neighbor in the apartment next door. Through the wall, Ann heard suspicious noises coming from her apartment. She suspected it could either be John with malicious intentions or a burglar breaking in. Both possibilities seemed dangerous. Not wanting to take any chances, Ann called the police. When they arrived, the officers escorted her back to her apartment and searched the premises for any threats. Suddenly, John emerged from the closet, holding clothes in one hand and an axe and a knife in the other. He appeared startled to see the police and claimed he had planned to surprise his ex-wife. However, and believed he had brought the weapons with the intent to harm her, possibly even to kill her, as she had finally escaped his control. Unsurprisingly, the police did not believe John's story about the surprise and arrested him. However, he was later released without charges because he had not harmed anyone and was technically in his own apartment. The police only secured a verbal promise from him to stay away from Anne. After the divorce was finalized, Anne left with her children, moved away, and went into hiding to escape her dangerous ex-husband. Eventually, John gave up pursuing her. He decided it was time to change his life, leaving the city and embarking on a tour around Europe in hopes of forgetting his troubled past. He began searching for work abroad, believing he could find better opportunities and earn more money. Finding temporary jobs abroad was not difficult for John, but he never stayed in one place for long. He traveled to Germany and France before eventually settling in the Netherlands. Further investigations did not uncover any evidence of assaults on women during these trips. While abroad, John returned to his old habits, searching for a woman he could marry. However, his efforts were unsuccessful, and he was eventually forced to return to his homeland. Interestingly, upon his return, John rediscovered his passion for painting. Experts later analyzed his artwork and attributed its themes to his criminal nature. His paintings were gruesome, often violent and bloody, depicting brutal scenes. However, at the time, they were dismissed as mere works of art. Later, John made a living as a carpenter, taking on repair and construction jobs. He eventually settled in London, where he met Melissa Halstead, a model and photographer. She had hired him to do repairs on a film set. Melissa was an incredibly beautiful woman, and John seemed to take an immediate interest in her. Originally from Ohio, USA, Melissa had moved to another country in Europe, where she felt lonely and had few social connections. She was unaware of John's violent past. John quickly regained his charm, and after visiting her on set a few times, he suggested they meet. This marked the beginning of their romantic relationship. At first, Melissa described their relationship as warm and loving, reflecting John's manipulative behavior. Over time, they began living together. Less than a year later, John attacked her for the first time. Before this, he had repeatedly broken her self-esteem and cheated on her, leaving her feeling completely hopeless. Her career began to suffer, and her family back in Ohio recognized the toxicity of the relationship. Both her mother and sister urged Melissa to leave John as soon as possible. About a year after they met, Melissa's sister visited her in England. While staying at Melissa and John's apartment, she discovered banned substance and some disturbing artwork that John had created. She was shocked by what she saw. Before leaving, Melissa's sister begged her to end the relationship immediately. Despite this, Melissa chose to stay with John. In 1987, John committed his first violent attack on Melissa, which led to legal trouble. He was cautioned twice for his violent behavior. On one occasion, John threw a chair at Melissa, injuring both her legs. On another occasion, he punched her in the face. However, both times he only received verbal warnings and small fines. At the time, British authorities had a lenient attitude towards domestic violence. In the summer of 1988, John decided to move to Austria, and Melissa went with him. Initially, the move seemed to benefit their relationship. They reconnected and experienced a period without violence. During this time, things went well. They both made good money, and Melissa's modeling career began to take off again. She traveled frequently for work, and they could now afford to rent an apartment in central Vienna. However, their relationship soon fell apart. One evening, John's violent nature resurfaced, and he attacked Melissa with a hammer. She was taken to the hospital with a fractured skull. It seems that John harbored resentment towards her and became increasingly obsessed with his art. Psychologists later analyzed his artwork and concluded that it reflected his inner turmoil and violent worldview. Unfortunately, at the time these drawings appeared, no one paid much attention to John or recognized the warning signs. The haunting images clearly showed his desire to kill. While John was in prison, Melissa was recovering from the attack. Despite everything, she no longer resented John and even began to miss him. In February 1989, she appealed to the Austrian legal system, asking the court to pardon John. Under Austrian law, she had the right to do so. Her appeal was successful. Melissa withdrew her statement about the attack, and John was released after serving only 6 months. However, the police ordered John to leave Austria. Despite this, Melissa chose to follow him. They settled in Amsterdam together. In Amsterdam, John and Melissa rented an apartment in the city center, worked, and used a rental car. Their home was located near the train station. In November 1989, Melissa called her family. Since no one was home, she left a voicemail wishing her loved ones well, expressing her love, and saying that she hoped to see them again soon. After the call, she went on a business trip. In the following months, her family tried to contact her, but they were unable to reach her. At that time, cell phones were not available, making communication even more difficult. John also ignored all calls from Melissa's family. After a while, Melissa, exhausted by the constant conflicts and abuse from John, decided to end their relationship. She confided in her colleagues at work, telling them that if anything happened to her, it would be because of John. Soon after, she disappeared and was never seen alive again. On May 3, 1990, a passerby in Rotterdam noticed a suspicious bag floating in a canal. Upon inspection, the bag was found to contain body parts, although the head and hands were missing. The witness immediately alerted the police. The brutal nature of the crime became evident when the body was examined. What shocked the police most was that the victim's spine had been broken in half, and evidence suggested she had been subjected to prolonged torture designed to inflict extreme pain. After the murder, the perpetrator placed the body in a large black bag, which was then dumped in a canal. At the same time, Melissa's family grew increasingly worried, as they had not heard from her for months. A missing person report had been filed in Amsterdam, but since the Rotterdam police did not have access to it, they were unable to identify the victim. With no leads, the investigation was eventually closed. The unidentified remains were buried in a public cemetery in Rotterdam in an unmarked grave, and the police remained unaware of the victim's identity. John, the killer, escaped justice. By 1991, John had returned to London alone. He never told anyone about what had happened to Melissa. Her family suspected that John was involved in her disappearance, but there was no evidence to prove it. As a result, John continued his life without facing any consequences. At a local pub, John met Delia Balmer, a 40-year-old nurse. Their meeting was initially accidental, but John quickly used his charm to make her fall in love with him. Delia, feeling lonely, invited him to move into her house. John seized the opportunity, helping her with the housework and earning her trust. During this time, he worked as a carpenter, earning a good income by creating furniture and home furnishings. However, over time, John's true nature began to reveal itself. After nearly 2 years together, in December 1993, Delia realized the extent of John's temper and cruelty. She finally asked him to leave. Surprisingly, he did not argue and agreed to move out. However, he did not truly leave her life. John continued to frequent the same shops and bars as Delia, making sure they crossed paths often. Wherever she went, John seemed to appear, controlling and pursuing her relentlessly. He even attempted to re-enter her apartment. In May 1994, Delia went on a short trip around Europe with a friend. When she returned, John was furious that he had temporarily lost control of her. He tracked her down, tied her to the bed, and threatened her with a weapon, intensifying her fear. To further intimidate her, John told her a disturbing story about his previous girlfriend, Melissa. He confessed to killing Melissa, sitting with her body in his apartment for 3 days, and then disposing of her remains by dumping them in a canal in another city. Delia realized she was now trapped with a crazed killer. John demanded her complete obedience, warning her that if she did not comply, she would suffer the same fate as Melissa. Delia endured a week of abuse. During this time, she was repeatedly beaten, assaulted, and threatened with a weapon before finally being released in the summer of 1994. In July, Delia sought refuge at a shelter and reported the abuse to the police. She even showed them John Sweeney's disturbing drawings. However, the police dismissed her concerns, calling them a joke and accusing her of exaggeration. In early November, John left the apartment, and Delia took the opportunity to change the locks. When he returned on November 11th and discovered what she had done, he became furious. Despite locking the door, he managed to break in and attack Delia. The next day, Delia fled to the police station again. The officers escorted her back home, but John had disappeared. However, another attack occurred the following day. This time, Delia's neighbors and friends called the police. The officers arrived just in time, as John was inside the apartment with Delia. She ran out to meet the police, crying and terrified. During a search of the apartment, the police discovered a bag in the bathroom that John had brought with him. Inside the bag were rubber gloves, a mask, some rope, and surgical instruments, items that could be used by a murderer. Despite this alarming discovery, the police dismissed its significance. John was arrested and held for a week before being released on the condition that he return to his parents' home, 300 kilometers away from Delia. This distance was considered safe. But on December 22nd, John violated the terms of his bail by going to Delia's house in the evening. That night, Delia, feeling nervous, used a brick to block the basement door before going downstairs to put her bike away. She kept glancing around cautiously, afraid that John might be nearby. When she turned around, she saw John's familiar face staring at her. Suddenly, he pulled out an axe and swung it at her. She tried to defend herself with a knife, trying to cut his palm. Enraged, John grabbed the knife and attacked her. Delia screamed in pain and desperately used her bike as a shield against his repeated attacks. The commotion attracted the attention of neighbors. A man rushed to help, wielding a baseball bat and confronting John to protect Delia. John struck the neighbor several times before fleeing the scene. Delia was then taken to the hospital in critical condition, where she underwent several emergency operations that ultimately saved her life. The police began pursuing John Sweeney, who had fled. Despite their efforts, he evaded capture and escaped the UK. He remained in hiding for the next 6 years until he returned to the UK in 2000. To avoid detection, he used a false identity. John was highly skilled at altering his appearance, which made it easy for him to avoid detection. He quickly found work on construction sites and often used different fake names to remain unnoticed. After returning to his hometown, he met Paula Fields. Like John's other victims, Paula was lonely and vulnerable. Since they both came from the same area, John was able to establish a relationship with her quickly. Paula had spent most of her life on the streets. It was surprising that John managed to deceive her, as people like Paula, hardened by street life, were often very adept at reading others and recognizing manipulators or abusers. However, John Sweeney was such a skilled manipulator that he succeeded in fooling even someone like her. At first, their relationship seemed calm and romantic, but over time, John began to show signs of dissatisfaction. His frustration escalated into aggression and hostility. In December, John Sweeney committed a brutal crime. He killed Paula, and after handling the body, he placed the parts in separate bags. He disposed of the bags in the London Canal. On February 19, 2001, boys fishing in the canal discovered one of the bags containing Paula's body parts. They immediately contacted the police, who later recovered 5 more bags containing other parts of her remains. Advances in DNA technology helped identify the victim as Paula Fields and revealed a suspicious boyfriend. At the time, John was using an alias. However, further investigation by the police uncovered that her boyfriend's real name was John Sweeney. He was also linked to the murder of Melissa Halstead and was wanted for an attack on Delia Balmer. John became one of Britain's most wanted men. The police eventually tracked John down at a construction site in central London, where he was working. A specialist armed team was deployed to arrest him, as he was known to carry weapons. When apprehended, John did not resist, likely overwhelmed by the presence of heavily armed officers. A subsequent search of his flat uncovered over 300 gruesome works of art and poetry. Some of these artworks contained references to Paula and other victims. John Sweeney was later convicted of the attempted murder of Delia Balmer. On March 5, 2002, he was sentenced to life in prison, with the possibility of parole after only 9 years. With good behavior, he could have been released even earlier. Delia was deeply unhappy with this outcome. As the police continued to investigate Paula Fields' death, they faced numerous challenges. It took another 6 years. In 2008, they were finally able to match DNA from an unidentified victim found in a Rotterdam canal to Melissa Halstead. This discovery linked John Sweeney to another murder. Delia's testimony, which included his confession, along with the presence of his DNA on Melissa's remains, played a key role in connecting him to this brutal crime. Melissa's murder had taken place more than 20 years earlier. Her family finally learned the truth and sought justice. Despite the evidentiary challenges, the police decided to use John's artwork as admissible evidence. Several of his drawings referenced Melissa's death long before her body was identified. One drawing even depicted a headstone bearing her name, details that only the killer could have known. Nearly 21 years after Melissa's death and 6 years after Paula's murder, the trial for these cases was held on April 4, 2011. John Sweeney was convicted of murder and sentenced to 2 life sentences without the possibility of parole. This ensures that John will spend the rest of his life in prison. Hello everyone, today we will learn about another case. The case of Troy LaFerrara. In 1994, in the tiny town of North Pole, Alaska, USA, Miranda was born. She had an older sister named Ashley, and both girls were raised by their mother, Elizabeth, a single parent. From the very beginning, their lives were not easy. At the age of 2, Miranda was diagnosed with congenital hip dysplasia. Because of this, from an early age she began to wear a special corrector so that she could be mobile naturally. It was difficult for her. Miranda was often perceived as an outcast with her mother. Everything was going badly. Elizabeth had problems with work. During this tough time, her brother-in-law, Richard, became a source of support. He was a serviceman and seemed like a decent person. He frequently visited her home, and he sometimes even looked after the children. However, as it later turned out, his intentions were much darker. When Miranda and Ashley turned 5 and 6 years old, respectively, Richard abused the girls. He convinced them not to tell anyone about what had happened. Only a few years later, the eldest daughter found the strength to overcome her fear and speak about the abuse. It was then that Elizabeth reported the matter to the police. When officers came to search Richard's house, they found a diary detailing all the abuse he had inflicted on the girls. He was sentenced to 10 years in prison but was released after just 6 years for good behavior. This was his first criminal offense, which contributed to his early release. By the time Miranda and Ashley turned 9 and 10 years old, respectively, they were grappling with the psychological trauma inflicted by Richard. When Elizabeth and her children learned that he would be released, it was a tremendous shock. They decided to move to another city. During this period, their situation worsened. Financial difficulties increased, and they felt betrayed by someone they had trusted. All of this became a significant burden. In their hometown, there was nothing that held them back. Living in proximity to such a threat was unbearable. Miranda hoped for a fresh start with the move, but it did not help her cope with the psychological trauma she had endured. By the age of 12, she began to exhibit rebellious behavior, associating with a group of older, dysfunctional teenagers. They engaged in substance abuse and excessive drinking. In her quest to fit in with this group, Miranda also began to indulge in these harmful behaviors. During this period, she met a man who was 24 years old at the time and had a bad reputation. Unfortunately, Miranda seemed to have always attracted such trouble. She became part of a group of teenagers with unconventional interests. They referred to themselves as a satanic group. Most people considered them gloomy and dangerous. Although Miranda wasn't an official member, she clearly participated in activities because of him, who persuaded her to join in some rituals, after which her soul seemingly belonged to him. When Miranda finally told her mother about what had happened, Elizabeth tried to sever all her daughter's ties with this unhealthy group. Unfortunately, this did not help. She began to run away frequently, developed an addiction to hard substances, and her school performance deteriorated significantly, as did her relationships with classmates. She became very aggressive and often instigated fights. The situation continued to worsen, and Elizabeth struggled with similar addictions. Miranda's biological father intervened. As far as is known, this was the only significant impact he had on her life. At his insistence, Miranda was placed in a clinic where she received help to combat the consequences of her experiences. She was prescribed medications and diagnosed with mental disorders. Unfortunately, this was of little help. According to people who were well acquainted with the dysfunctional family, by the age of 16, Miranda decided to drop out of school. At the same time, she immersed herself in wild parties with her troubled peers. She began a series of relationships with older men, one of whom got her pregnant. Although Miranda decided to keep the child, she didn't even know who the biological father was. After that, Elizabeth asked her to terminate the pregnancy. Meanwhile, relations with her family deteriorated to an extreme point. Ashley could no longer watch her mother and sister turn into addicts. She felt forced to leave home, resulting in Miranda losing her only support. By this time, after Elizabeth's overdose, social services decided to take Miranda away from Elizabeth. She is destined to be in a new family in a small town called Dan in North Carolina. It was here that Miranda met a 20-year-old man named Alit Barber. By this time, Miranda was 17, and Alit was engaged to a girl who was expecting a child with him. This girl later turned out to be another underage student. A love triangle formed around Alit, who had 2 pregnant girls at once. The children were born about a month and a half apart. Now, the group had 2 newborns that needed care. However, all of them are not mature enough to take on the responsibilities of being parents. A few months after the children's birth, Alit's own daughter was hospitalized due to an overdose of sedatives. The behavior of the biological father had always been problematic, and from that moment, it only deteriorated further. His relationship with his fiancée began to suffer, and she ultimately decided to break up with him, leaving with the child for another city. This led to Alit and Miranda being together, forming a full-fledged couple, raising little Aria together. During this time, Miranda willingly talked about her difficult past, and Alit became intrigued as they discussed her experiences with the satanic cult. About a year into their relationship, they decided to leave North Carolina, as their families did not approve of their lifestyle. This escape was necessary to distance themselves from constant conflicts and the supervision of the older generation. Thus, a series of moves began for the young family. They struggled to settle down anywhere for long due to employment difficulties, until they finally reached a suburb in Pennsylvania called Port Trevorton, where only about 400 people lived at that time. They had neither money nor work to establish a foothold. However, Alit had a friend in the area who helped them by providing a place to stay. They were essentially marginalized individuals, making it challenging for them to find regular employment, as they were quite unsociable, which led to difficulties with social interactions. On October 22, Miranda, in her search for income, decided to offer herself as an escort service. She emphasized in her advertisement that she was not willing to provide intimate services but was available for companionship and to accompany men to various events. Outwardly, she seemed quite pleasant, and she met several men for $80, engaging in conversations but without intimate contact. It is difficult to say for sure whether she truly adhered to the boundaries she set. In one such encounter, she met a man named Troy LaFerrara, a 42-year-old married man who had been a decent family man and church member for decades. Upon seeing Miranda's advertisement, he became immediately interested. When he called Miranda, he offered a different type of service, not just companionship, which angered her. She refused his proposal, pointing out what she had written in her ad. After some time, however, disturbing thoughts began to plague her mind. Miranda and Alit realized they were dealing with a rather wealthy man since he had made a very generous financial offer. After discussing it, they recognized that this could be a potential way to alleviate their financial struggles. Although they had not previously fantasized about such desires, the allure of crime as a solution to their financial difficulties excited both Alit and Miranda greatly. At the beginning of their relationship, Alit and Miranda immediately developed a common interest in satanic themes. Their conversations were often filled with dark imagery, including mentions of blood. They did not plan to kill a specific person, however. They would often end such discussions with thoughts of finding a victim and experiencing what it was like to take a person's life. When Troy made his generous offer, Miranda calmed down after the unsettling proposal and began discussing the situation with Alit. Troy lived in another city, and their correspondence took place via the internet, which could easily be deleted along with the removal of profiles. They were not connected in any way in real life, making him an ideal target for murder. They realized they could make good money and fulfill their long-standing dream. A couple of hours later, Miranda agreed to Troy's offer and messaged for him. They agreed to meet in a parking lot of a supermarket on the outskirts of the city, where Miranda would be in her car. Miranda suggested going to a neighboring suburb, claiming it was her summer house that she used for work. Naturally, she did not take the initiative alone. Her boyfriend was supposed to be in the back seat of the car to help her bring her dark fantasy to life. Their plan involved disguising tools and a blanket in the car. The plan stipulated that Miranda would say a code phrase, after which Alit would attack the victim. The meeting was scheduled for November 11, 2013, a date chosen deliberately because it turned out to be Alit's birthday. At the appointed hour, the Honda CR-V was waiting for Troy in the shopping center parking lot. Upon entering the vehicle, he immediately paid Miranda the agreed amount. They drove to a neighboring town, also small and provincial. However, instead of taking him to the house they had discussed, Miranda drove to a secluded spot on a quiet, deserted street in a forested area. She stopped the car and said the code phrase, after which Alit began to strangle Troy with a wire. However, they underestimated their victim's strength. Troy turned out to be quite a powerful man, managing to open the door and even pull one leg out onto the street. Alit quickly weakened. Miranda grew nervous because everything was supposed to have ended long ago, yet it did not go according to plan. They did not expect such resistance. The worst part was that Miranda saw headlights approaching in the rearview mirror, which made her realize they could be caught. She took out the knives they had prepared for a bloody massacre, began to stab Troy multiple times in the chest, neck, face, and stomach. When Troy stopped struggling, ceased showing signs of life, Alit got out of the car, put his leg inside, and closed the door from the outside. He then resumed his position in the back seat, and they fled the scene. They drove to another isolated area in the suburbs, where they stripped Troy of his wallet, expensive watch, jewelry, and anything else they could find, except for his mobile phone. Elit insisted they leave the phone behind, fearing they could be tracked by geolocation. They disposed of Troy's body by the side of the road and drove away, convinced they had committed the perfect crime. Miranda and Elit stopped at the nearest Walmart to purchase cleaning agents to tidy up the car interior. They bought special compounds for the seats and mats, as well as a set of gloves for their cleaning efforts. The front of the car was covered in blood, and cleaning it thoroughly took them several hours. They went to another secluded location to wash away the blood. Afterward, they decided to celebrate Elit's birthday. They went to a restaurant and then to a strip club, using the money stolen from their victim. Elit and Miranda simply continued living their lives as if nothing had happened. The next day, a couple of random witnesses stumbled upon Troy's body, which was not even covered with branches or dirt. The man had been carelessly discarded like trash, with 20 stab wounds and marks of strangulation on his neck. Naturally, witnesses immediately called the police. When law enforcement arrived, they discovered not only the body but also the cord from the electrical device used for strangulation. The body was identifiable because a mobile phone remained in the victim's pocket. The police checked the call history and found that on November 11th, he had contacted only 2 numbers, his wife and 1 unsaved number. After investigating the unsaved number, the police traced it back to Miranda and obtained her details, including her residence. She immediately piqued the investigators' interest. Within minutes, the police were on their way to her house. Miranda was detained and taken to the station for questioning. From the very beginning, the story unfolded. Miranda denied any involvement in the crime and claimed not to know the victim. Nevertheless, it was obvious that she was nervous and acting suspiciously. It was enough for the detectives to ask for her mobile phone for her testimony to begin to change. At first, she vehemently refused to provide her mobile phone, but as the detectives examined the contents of her correspondence and contacts, Miranda grew more and more anxious. Despite their efforts, they were unable to find the necessary information immediately. Miranda had nothing to present, and so they simply let her go. When Miranda returned home, something changed within her. She began to confide in the first person she met, her friend, about the murder. However, she did this so abruptly that it seemed awkward from the very start. The young man tried to convince Miranda that she should return to the police and confess everything. Her husband, Elit, joined the conversation and acted shocked by the story. Miranda clearly felt remorse. She confessed to her friend that she had stabbed the victim with a knife, but she did not mention Elit at all. Throughout the conversation, her husband never confessed to even being present in the car. Even the friend got the impression that he was manipulating Miranda, trying to impose a greater sense of guilt on her, which seemed strange. Instead of taking any part of the blame, Elit feigned shock and even began to cry. The friend did not suspect Elit could be involved in the crime. On the contrary, he believed Elit to be innocent. Miranda struggled with her thoughts most of the night. Finally, around 4 a.m., she gathered her strength and returned to the police station, where she recounted the murder, insisting that it had been self-defense. She confessed that she had agreed to meet Troy but not to provide intimate services. She had only intended to escort him. However, when Troy insisted on paying for intimate, Miranda informed him that she was only 16, which seemed to unsettle him. She claimed he would face criminal prosecution if she reported him to the police. This was a lie, as she had just turned 19. Miranda was clearly trying to shift some of the blame onto the victim to justify her actions. According to her, instead of backing off, Troy began to force her to have intimate. When he realized she was not going to comply, he became aggressive, and she felt that her life was threatened. Recalling her childhood experiences with her Uncle Richard, she claimed to have defended herself. However, Miranda's words sounded implausible. The 20 stab wounds she inflicted, which did not resemble defensive wounds. Moreover, a cord was found with which Troy had been strangled, leaving a mark on his neck that contradicted Miranda's account. It appeared that a third party had been involved. To verify her claims, the police began tracking movements before the meeting. They quickly found surveillance footage filmed in the parking lot just 5 minutes before the scheduled encounter. The recording showed an unknown young man hiding in the back seat of the car, who was soon identified as 22-year-old Alit, Miranda's husband. It was decided to question him. The criminals clearly had not thought through their plan, as they lacked a coherent version of events. As a result, Alit provided a version that was completely different from Miranda's account. Detectives immediately noted that while Miranda was very emotional, Alit showed no feelings. He was cold but surprisingly quick to talk, as if he had long wanted to discuss the crime. While describing the attack, Alit spent much more time discussing the purchases made with the stolen money, including a detailed account of the food they had eaten on his birthday. His lack of concern about the murder was unsettling. After this, Alit and Miranda were arrested and remained in custody until the hearing. However, by that day, both had retracted their statements, now claiming their innocence. This contradicted what Miranda had said during a television interview shortly before the hearing began, where several journalists had spoken to her. Miranda participated in a viral interview, stating that this was not her first experience with such circumstances, and claimed she had stopped counting the victims after reaching the 22nd murder from 2008 to 2013. However, all this seemed absurd. The family spoke out in defense of Miranda, and everyone who knew her well insisted that she had lied her entire life. The reasons for her actions were always the same: Miranda just wanted to draw attention to herself and enjoyed it. Despite this, she insisted that all the murders began when she became a member of a Satanist group in her teens. Miranda avoided details and did not even know the names of the victims, yet she persistently called herself a serial killer. She claimed that her group only killed those who committed bad deeds, for which she was nicknamed Dextrin. During her conversations, she was unable to provide details about these episodes, of which she claimed there were many more. She mentioned living in Alaska during this period, where there were reportedly many missing people. It seemed that all this was a blatant lie. Additionally, her behavior clearly did not align with that of an experienced criminal. She even left the victim's mobile phone right in his pocket without hiding or destroying it. Troy LaFerrara was actually the first victim. During the investigation, it turned out that 2 more men had responded to Miranda's ad, but they did not come, thus saving their lives. However, there were opposing opinions. Psychologists worked extensively with her, and some were convinced that she had killed people before. She frequently talked about her life, including all these alleged ritual murders, and recounting these stories was one of her favorite activities during their relationship. She spoke eloquently about these stories, although she refused to repeat them to journalists, claiming it was to protect the other participants in the murders. Her friends thought she was possessed, while others in the prosecutor's office believed the criminals were trying to avoid the death penalty by claiming insanity. All this was very difficult to prove or disprove, given the numerous statements from the detainees. Before the hearing began in 2016, everything was still uncertain. However, other upheavals occurred. The mother of Miranda voluntarily took her own life. She could not cope with the public pressure of being accused of raising a monster. By that time, she had been struggling with addiction and mental health issues for many years, and her relatives believed she simply could not manage them. She did not leave a suicide note, so it is not known for certain how much influence her daughter had on this decision. Many believe that the public pressure surrounding Miranda was the last straw. That same year, while in prison, Miranda asked for a divorce from her husband. She continued to insist that she was a victim from the day she was born, claiming she was surrounded by manipulators, liars, and criminals. One day, she recounted how she was tied to a bed and had an abortion at home. This happened after she told her mother she was pregnant but did not know by whom. Her ex-boyfriend allegedly forced her into prostitution from the age of 12. However, it is difficult to determine which, if any, of these claims were true. Despite being diagnosed with several abnormalities in the hospital, it remains uncertain whether she ever took medication for conditions such as attention deficit disorder, schizophrenia, or bipolar disorder. Feeling the attention and interest of the public, Miranda continued to spin one tale after another. Now she remembered the name of a boy, whom she claimed was killed in another ritual. She then stated that she voluntarily went to the police because she wanted to be arrested to finally stop killing. Elite and Miranda were found guilty. However, there were difficulties in determining the punishment due to their young age. The prosecutor's office fought in vain for the death penalty but was unsuccessful, largely due to organizations advocating for the abolition of the death penalty. As a result, in September 2014, they were sentenced to life imprisonment. Aria fell under the jurisdiction of Child Protective Services. Given how public the scandal was, the little girl's name was changed, and she was placed in a foster family. Most of all, the murder shocked Troy LaFerrara's wife. She had no idea her husband was living a double life, and she was even more shocked by the tragic ending. The case of Troy LaFerrara stands as a somber testament to the destructive power of unresolved trauma, the allure of darkness, and the fragility of human lives caught in the crosshairs of desperation and choice. This narrative is more than a recounting of a crime. It is a profound exploration of how personal pain, toxic relationships, and societal neglect can coalesce into an act of irreversible violence, leaving a trail of devastation that echoes far beyond its immediate victims. Miranda's journey from a vulnerable child to a convicted killer is a harrowing descent marked by pivotal moments of suffering and rebellion. Diagnosed with a physical disability at age 2, her early years were shaped by the struggle for mobility and the isolation it bred. The abuse she and Ashley endured at 5 and 6, respectively, from Richard, a trusted family figure whose dark intentions were later exposed in his diary, planted seeds of trauma that would grow unchecked. Troy LaFerrara, a church-going husband and father, entered this story as an unlikely victim, drawn by Miranda's online ad for companionship in October 2013. His offer of payment for more than she advertised sparked a plan born of financial need and dark fantasy. This was not a crime of passion but a calculated act, driven by greed and a perverse desire to experience murder, rooted in the satanic themes that had long captivated their conversations. The story of Troy LaFerrara is a mirror to society's failures and humanity's capacity for darkness, a call to confront the roots of violence, trauma, isolation, and the allure of destructive bonds, while mourning the lives it claims. For Miranda, it is a life sentence that began long before prison, a confinement rooted in a childhood stolen by abuse and an adulthood lost to her own choices. For Elite, it is the end of a path paved by recklessness and a chilling lack of remorse. For the rest of us, it is a plea to see the unseen, to intervene before despair turns deadly, and to honor the sanctity of every life, however flawed, that crosses our path. In the quiet of Port Trevorton, Troy's memory endures as a silent witness to a tragedy that need not have been, a life extinguished by two souls who chose darkness over light, leaving only questions and sorrow in their wake. Welcome back, detectives. Let's dive into another horrible case. The case of Jasmine Pace. Jasmine Pace, a 22-year-old college student, planned to spend Thanksgiving 2022 with her family. However, her plans suddenly changed, leaving her mother surprised. At the last moment, she sent a message canceling the family gathering. Shortly afterward, a new post appeared on Jasmine's Facebook page that read, "Enjoy Thanksgiving with my baby," accompanied by a photo that raised concerns. Initially confused, her family's concern quickly escalated into panic when they realized something was wrong. Jasmine was missing, and someone seemed to be impersonating her online. On the night of November 22, 2022, Jasmine drove a white Chevy Equinox away from her home in Chattanooga, Tennessee, at approximately 11:30 p.m. Later, her mother, Katrina Bean, received a text from Jasmine's phone stating that she would spend the rest of the week at her friend Emma's house. Since Jasmine was grieving the recent loss of her grandmother to cancer, her decision to skip the family gathering didn't immediately alarm her loved ones. She often withdrew for short periods to cope with her emotions. But everything took a troubling turn when Jasmine made a Facebook post. The post featured Jasmine in an uncharacteristically revealing outfit, which surprised her mother. What alarmed her father, Travis Pace, was even more troubling. Jasmine's extensive tattoos were missing from the photo. Each tattoo represented a timeline in her life, added months apart, creating a distinctive pattern, especially on her right arm. The glaring absence of these tattoos confirmed the post was fake, and Jasmine's family realized the situation was far worse than they had imagined. Katrina reached out to Jasmine's friend Emma and confirmed what she had suspected. Jasmine had been missing from her family for a week, contradicting the claims in a recent message. Several other friends and family members had also received suspicious messages supposedly from Jasmine, all of which raised concerns. The family immediately began searching for her. Jasmine's SUV, equipped with a GPS feature from the My Chevrolet app, allowed her mother to track its location. The car was found parked outside a building on Mountain Creek Road in Chattanooga. By the time it was discovered, it was 8:30 p.m. on November 26th, 4 days after Jasmine was last seen leaving her mother's house late on the evening of the 22nd. The area where the car was located was unfamiliar to the family, and as far as they knew, Jasmine didn't know anyone there. When they approached the car, they noticed that the driver's seat was pushed far back, suggesting that someone much taller than the petite Jasmine had been driving. The family contacted the police, who arrived on the scene and filed a report describing the situation. Katrina also reached out to the family's cell phone provider. Since Jasmine was part of their family plan, her mother, Katrina, had access to her phone records. The records revealed that there had been no calls from Jasmine's phone for several days. In the presence of the police, Katrina began calling the numbers listed in the call log. One number stood out, a call with someone Jasmine had spoken to for over an hour on the night of the 22nd. When Katrina dialed that number, it connected to a young man named Jason, whom Jasmine had recently met on a dating app. Jason, a computer science student at a university in Chattanooga, had been casually dating Jasmine for a few months. Their relationship was not serious, so Jasmine never introduced him to her parents, Katrina and Travis, who didn't know him. When Jasmine was reported missing, Jason claimed he hadn't heard from her in several days and that their last conversation had been brief. However, Katrina found his behavior suspicious and felt he might be lying. His apparent lack of concern further alarmed her. Despite Katrina urging the police to dig deeper, they refused, arguing that Jasmine was an adult and there was no clear evidence of foul play. Determined to find their daughter, Katrina and Travis began knocking on doors throughout the apartment complex on Mountain Creek Road. Unfortunately, no neighbors had seen Jasmine. They sought help from the apartment guard, who provided security camera footage. The video showed a white Chevrolet entering the parking lot. By cross-referencing this footage with timestamps from the My Chevrolet app, they pinpointed the general time frame but couldn't identify the driver. Katrina then noticed an unread text message from Jasmine, sent on November 23rd. The message included a location and timestamp, showing Jasmine's device had been at a specific place at 2:18 a.m. This was highly unusual, as Jasmine had never sent such cryptic messages, especially during the night. Acting quickly, Katrina and Travis went straight to the address mentioned in the message. Jasmine's parents, Katrina and Travis, knocked on every door in the building, paying particular attention to room 210. Neighbors mentioned hearing a loud noise from that unit around 2:15 a.m. on November 23rd. Upon investigation, Katrina and Travis quickly discovered that the tenant of the apartment was Jason. The unit was quite small, consisting of a kitchenette near the sofa, a hallway leading to the bedroom, and a single bathroom. From the front door, they could see a small duffel bag filled with cleaning supplies sitting on the kitchen table. While searching, Travis found Jasmine's driver's license and credit cards in a drawer. They called the police again, but after speaking with Katrina and the neighbors, the officers left, citing a lack of immediate evidence of foul play. Frustrated by the lack of action, Katrina went back to the apartment several times over the next few hours. She collected items like laptops, electronics, cell phones, a camera, and an iPad, anything that might offer clues to her daughter's whereabouts. She and Travis also searched the trash cans outside the building. Nearly at midnight, the police finally returned to room 210 with a search warrant and officially began their investigation. During the inspection, they observed suspicious stains resembling blood in multiple areas, on the wooden floor in the living room, the linoleum in the bathroom, and the carpet in the bedroom. They also discovered blood stains on the bathroom doors and walls. The substantial amount of cleaning supplies found in the apartment further heightened suspicions. At the scene, police seized a pair of white sneakers and blue pants for further investigation. In the living room, broken glass fragments hinted at a possible violent altercation. In the bedroom, the furniture appeared to have been moved, suggesting attempts to conceal signs of a struggle. This discovery led investigators to focus more intently on piecing together the unsettling clues surrounding Jasmine's disappearance. In some parts of the apartment, it was evident that furniture had been rearranged to hide evidence. A kitchen knife was found on the bed, and stains that could potentially be blood were present in nearly every room. A forensic team was brought in to apply a specialized solution designed to detect traces of blood. The investigation shifted from a missing persons case to a murder inquiry. Detectives obtained CCTV footage from the apartment building and nearby areas to construct a timeline of Jason Chen's movements, hoping it would lead to locating Jasmine Pace. Investigators confirmed that Jasmine arrived at 110 Tremont before midnight on November 22. Her Chevrolet was seen entering the building's parking lot and later leaving, with investigators tracking the vehicle to the apartment complex where Jason lived. The day after her arrival, Jasmine was recorded leaving the building, wearing a hoodie. A surveillance camera at the apartment's entrance captured Jason leaving multiple times, including at 7:30 p.m. Just 3 minutes later, someone in a light-colored sweatshirt was seen driving Jasmine's SUV to the Signal View condo, where the vehicle was abandoned. On November 23, 2022, Jason took several suspicious trips. In the morning, he went to Walmart and purchased hydrogen peroxide, cleaning supplies, and a pair of white sneakers, which were clearly visible on the store's surveillance footage. These sneakers were later found discarded in a trash can near the apartment complex. That evening, Jason visited Ugrin to buy a pack of paper towels. Between the Walmart trip and disposing of some clothes, investigators believe Jason was attempting to conceal evidence. His movements were monitored through various surveillance videos across Chattanooga, where his distinctive white sweatshirt made him easily identifiable even in blurry footage. Around 6 p.m. on the 23rd, a man in a white sweatshirt was filmed struggling to move a large suitcase from the apartment entrance to the parking lot. Shortly afterward, Jason's black Toyota Camry was seen driving away. On November 29th, a week after Jasmine's disappearance, Jason was found at his parents' home. The arresting officers in Nolanville observed cuts on Jason's arms and legs, suggesting a violent encounter. A search warrant was issued for the home, resulting in the seizure of a black backpack and handwritten notes from the room Jason had been staying in. The notes appeared to show him trying to construct his version of the incident. Detectives discovered Jason had last seen Jasmine on November 19th, according to notes he made. He claimed they had spoken and mentioned that Jasmine struggled with mental health issues. Jason seemingly prepared for his eventual questioning by portraying Jasmine as homeless. During a search of Jason's backpack, detectives found his phone and a SIM card removed from Jasmine's phone. Upon examining Jason's phone, investigators recovered a photo of Jasmine standing in his bathroom on the night she disappeared. They also found screenshots of text messages from Jasmine, though the content of the messages was missing. The morning following Jasmine's apparent death, Jason sent her a photo captioned, "Slept like a baby," followed by a text later that day saying, "We'll meet again tonight." Metadata revealed the photo had been taken 2 years earlier. Jasmine's phone records showed she visited Walmart with Jason on the morning she disappeared, but surveillance footage only captured Jason shopping alone. Investigators traced Jason's movements, revealing that he loaded a large suitcase into his Toyota Camry and drove to Suck Creek Road near the riverbank. On December 1st, Thursday, investigators found a suitcase along the riverbank. It belonged to Jason and contained Jasmine's body. She was wrapped in 3 garbage bags and restrained with handcuffs. Her right hand was cuffed to her right ankle, while her left ankle was cuffed to her right elbow. The handcuffs were basic models, not police issue, with one chain broken. An autopsy confirmed Jasmine had been fatally attacked, with the bullet concentrated in a single area of her body. In December 2022, Jason Chen's bail was set at $5 million, sparking outrage due to the disturbing details of Jasmine's murder. Many believed he shouldn't have been offered bail at all. Evidence revealed that Jason had accessed Jasmine's phone and SIM card to manage her bank account and post fake messages after her death. During his opening statement on the first day of court proceedings, lawyer Josh Weiss did not claim his client's innocence. He acknowledged that Jason killed Jasmine but argued that it was unintentional. The prosecution did not pursue the death penalty. If convicted of first-degree murder, Jason faces life in prison without the possibility of parole. His best chance for a lighter sentence would be to plead to a lesser charge, such as manslaughter. To do this, the defense aimed to convince the jury that Jason killed Jasmine in a moment of passion, having been provoked into an extreme emotional reaction that resulted in her death. The defense's arguments suggested that they had been drinking wine late at night at Jason's home, and that Jasmine had gone to the kitchen to get water. While there, she allegedly heard constant notifications from a dating app on Jason's phone. This led to an argument between the two, during which Jasmine reportedly attacked Jason with a broken wine glass. Jason, who had earlier taken a kitchen knife to his bedroom to open a bottle of wine, used the knife during the struggle. The defense explained the stains on Jasmine's body as part of an incident that occurred after the attack. They claimed Jason panicked after the attack and handcuffed Jasmine to fit her into a suitcase. Video recordings from Jason and Jasmine's phones, along with testimony from neighbors, provided a timeline of the murder and Jason's attempts to cover it up. Neighbor Courtney Brewer testified to hearing an argument after 2 a.m. The reconstruction of the murder relied heavily on the physical evidence found at the crime scene, but this is where the case became complicated. Police applied a chemical to various items at the crime scene, including a broken knife. Katrina inspected and searched the crime scene. The defense later called its expert to highlight significant changes observed between the initial police response and the scene's documentation. Furniture had been moved, and questions arose about whether certain items were relevant evidence. Travis testified that, when he initially entered the room with Katrina to find their daughter, he didn't see a knife on the bed. The medical examiner determined the attack was deliberate and found no suspicious evidence contradicting this conclusion. Based on the location of the wounds, Jasmine was likely in a fetal position during the assault. The handcuffs she wore were most likely applied while she was still alive. Additionally, the medical examiner found no alcohol in her system, which contradicted Jason's claim that they had been drinking wine. Jason's argument that Jasmine provoked him by becoming angry over dating app notifications was proven false. A state expert reviewed the app's data and confirmed no notifications were received. Jason chose not to testify in his defense. Evidence was presented quickly. Jason's lawyer withdrew support for his initial story, instead highlighting the absence of handcuff marks on Jasmine's wrists, which would have been visible if she had been alive when restrained. The presence of handcuffs suggested that the attack was premeditated. The number of wounds indicated that Jason had sufficient time to think through and carry out the assault. During closing arguments, prosecutor Cody Vamp outlined the sequence of events, including Courtney Brewer hearing someone running to the apartment door at 2 a.m. The jury began deliberating after the final arguments and delivered a verdict shortly afterward. One juror confirmed that the repeated visits by Jasmine Pace's family to the crime scene did not influence their decision. At the sentencing phase, jurors had to decide whether Jason Chen should ever be eligible for parole. Jason's attorney appealed to the jury, asking them to grant his client a chance for redemption. However, the jury deliberated for less than an hour and ultimately convicted Jason Chen of first-degree murder, sentencing him to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. Following the conviction, Jasmine Pace's family filed a wrongful death lawsuit against Jason Chen's parents. They accused the parents of harboring Jason, giving him money, and sharing information during the days after the murder while he was the prime suspect and their daughter was still missing. The loss of Jasmine and the ensuing legal battles deeply affected the Pace family. After the sentencing, the trials surrounding Jason Chen, referred to by the family as a monster, were marked by overwhelming grief. Prosecutors condemned his crime as heinous, cruel, and inhumane. Hello everyone, today we will learn about another case. The case of Sweppel family. Stephen Sweppel graduated from a local university in the 80s with a degree in business and planned to build his finances during his studies. He worked various jobs, including as a bartender and lifeguard, but he always remained modest. When Stephen met Cheryl, they got to know each other, and the lovers became inseparable. Thus began a relationship in which they complemented each other excellently. At university, she was very smart and loved working with children, therefore, she became a social studies teacher, actively participating in everything from book and religious gatherings to various events with her beloved. Some time later, they got married. It seemed like a perfect union, destined to last forever. After several unsuccessful attempts to have children, Cheryl decided not to take any risks. As a result, they decided to adopt. Cheryl has adopted 4 children into her family, which was a thrilling experience for her, as she had always wanted to be a mother for those who needed it during their childhood. In the large house where they lived, Ethan, the eldest of all the adopted children, was born in 1998. They liked him very much because he was greatly interested in everything. He was showing energy that they appreciated for the sake of the family. Their 4th child, Eleanor, was born in 2005. She was the youngest of them all. Events brought a stable income, therefore, their family was always filled with warmth and harmony. This is not a classic story of career success. Cheryl left her school job after more than a decade, allowing her to spend more time with her children. She regularly started visiting her children's parents and grandparents, who lived a few kilometers away. They became local celebrities. A wealthy family adopting 4 children took on real parental roles. They wanted to give their growing generation as much as possible. In February 2008, everything turned upside down. The bank found itself in danger due to an incident involving the theft of over $500,000. Investigative organizations that were involved dismissed Stephen. But that was not the end. The investigation lasted longer than necessary to maintain its progress since there was no overwhelming evidence of his involvement. Ultimately, it was revealed that his position was affected by the economic crisis in 2007, related to problems in the mortgage market and over-indebtedness. Stephen sought to create a financial cushion that was plausible, as he was hard at work during that period. In a constant state of stress, a person is prone to making mistakes. New information reveals that throughout this time, they were indeed becoming the center of public attention, as the waste of such an amount appeared to be a source of sensational news regarding involvement in financial crime. Stephen lived under significant, constant pressure, especially from Cheryl, which irritated him. Totaling $559,040 over 7 years was also reported. Stephen has pleaded not guilty, but has indicated to investigators that he did indeed transfer the money into a personal account. Like Cheryl, others did not understand that real problems had begun, which posed a significant issue for the family. More information on the 2008 financial crimes indicated that bail was set to remain free, scheduled for April 21st of the same year. In the event of a guilty plea for the serious crime, the minimum sentence would range from 3 to 5 years, after which a possibility might arise. A significant blow followed, not only to Stephen's reputation but also to their relationships in America. Sweppel family began to collapse, and they often struggled with the consequences. A true storm from the outside awaited them. However, they remained sociable and polite, despite the stress and mental disturbances that could affect future events. On Sunday morning, the Sweppel family attended Easter Mass at St. Mary's Catholic Church. Stephen and Cheryl's parents were also present at the Mass and later said they did not notice anything unusual about anyone's behavior. That evening, a family friend stopped by the Sweppels' home to check on Stephen. The friends saw one of the children, but saw nothing unusual. In fact, a terrible tragedy occurred. On March 23, 2008 morning at 6:31 a.m., Sweppel called 911 from his cell phone, asking for police to come to his home immediately and hanging up without giving his name. When police arrived at his home, they found Sweppel's wife, Cheryl, and their 4 adopted children, Ethan, 10, Seth, 9, Mira, 5, and Eleanor, 3, dead from multiple blunt force injuries to the upper body and head. Police recovered the alleged murder weapons, 2 baseball bats, at the scene. According to forensic experts, at the time of her death, Cheryl was around 30 years old and likely died around at 11:30 p.m. At the same time as Sweppel left a series of voice messages apologizing to former colleagues and relatives. Stephen Sweppel left a note for his father and brother at their law firm. In the note, he said his family was in heaven. According to Stephen, they were doomed to humiliation, and inevitably, he would end up in prison. According to the letter Stephen wrote, he gathered his 4 children into the family van parked in the garage and attempted to kill them then himself with carbon monoxide poisoning. When that didn't work, Stephen took the children back into the house and beat them to death. The 3 oldest children were found in their bedrooms. Eleanor, the youngest, was found downstairs in the playroom. Investigators soon uncovered that Stephen had murdered their entire family, revealing that reliable information was scarce. Cheryl was probably killed during the initial attempt to cover up the crime using carbon monoxide poisoning. Nevertheless, he lacked the courage to take his own life and refused to surrender. In the face of his wife's and children's horrific death, he can't separate death from life. Approximately at 6:36 a.m., unsuccessful attempts became more evident when Sweppel died in a tragic crash on Interstate 80 outside Iowa City. Witnesses said the driver was speeding and appeared to intentionally hit a concrete pillar. There were virtually no signs of slowing down at 100 kilometers per hour. Upon impact, the car overturned. They discovered a badly charred body, from which identification was initially impossible. The community reported that the threat was gone, not ignoring the risk that he may have orchestrated his death to evade justice. The charred remains were identified using dental records, to everyone's relief amidst the horrifying events now unfolding. It was hard to comprehend that they had been a respectable family, even if a bit of alcohol mixed with substances had been a fabrication that no one could believe or confirm. His loved ones often felt overwhelming sorrow. The event struck the entire community hard, as their lives had been brutally cut short. Stephen was not just a son-in-law to them, but a beloved son, and they sincerely mourned his death. On March 24th, their youngest child was to turn 3 years old. The term annihilator describes a phenomenon where a person kills their entire family. In this case, committing took his own life was akin to this situation. In 68% of cases involving family annihilators, they often kill to spare their loved ones from future suffering. Decent family men may seem like role models for family life, even if they begin to exhibit violent tendencies. The fact that Cheryl decided to return to work might have weighed heavily on him. Meanwhile, the mystery of the $500,000 stolen from the bank remains unsolved. Some believe everything is connected to the house that remained after settling the mortgage before going to court. Hello friends. Welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. The case of Bill Mowbray. Bill Mowbray lived in Brownsville, Texas, USA, in 1987. He was a decent and loving man who was married to Susie. This was his second marriage. From his first marriage, Bill had a daughter named Christine, who lived with her mother. When Susie met Bill, she was also divorced and had brought her 2 children to live with them. Over the past 9 years, they have built a happy family together. They were only 4 years apart in age and shared many things in common. Despite Susie's eccentric personality, Bill thought of her as the ideal wife. Bill was dedicated not only to his family but also to his career. After attending college, he began working in car sales and eventually transformed into a prominent businessman. By 1987, he had successfully managed Mal Motors, a Cadillac dealership in Brownsville, for 13 years. Susie actively supported his work, often visiting the dealership and even appearing in commercials broadcast across the city. Their success brought them considerable wealth, making them local celebrities regularly seen on TV. The family enjoyed traveling and owned a large mansion in Brownsville, 2 beachfront villas, and several luxury cars. On the surface, their life appeared enviable, but in reality, it was far less glamorous. In recent years, Bill's business had struggled, with the dealership stagnating and showing no signs of growth. Bill realized he was sinking deeper into debt because his expenses far exceeded his income. Despite facing financial difficulties, they upheld an image of wealth and continued to spend lavishly. As their money problems worsened, it became evident they were facing a serious financial crisis. By 1987, the situation had also severely impacted Bill's mental health. He began suffering from depression and often voiced that ending his own life might be the only way to escape their predicament. For Susie, this was an extremely difficult time. Her husband had never spoken or behaved this way before, and she feared he might do something drastic. His relatives were equally concerned for his well-being. They arranged consultations with a psychotherapist in the hopes of helping him, but their efforts yielded little progress. Bill remained firm in his belief that their family urgently needed money, otherwise, the business would collapse, leaving them on the verge of poverty. A solution to their financial struggles seemed nowhere in sight. Facing the threat of bankruptcy, Susie and Bill ultimately believed their best hope lay in securing a new loan from the bank. On September 15, 1987, Susie, 39, and Bill, 43, called to wish Susie's son a happy 16th birthday. At the time, her son and daughter were visiting their father. The conversation was warm and enjoyable, and everything seemed normal. Later that evening, Susie and Bill watched a TV show together before heading to bed. In the early hours of the morning, around 2:15 a.m., Susie woke up to the terrifying scene of her husband holding a weapon pointed at his own head. Before she could react, he pulled the trigger, using his right hand while lying on his side. Shocked and terrified, Susie called out to him, but he didn't respond. Blood rapidly soaked the bed, and with mounting horror, she realized the gravity of his injury. Panicked, she rushed to the home phone to seek help but accidentally dialed the number of her work partner, Bill Luke Roy, instead of emergency services. Susie told Luke what had happened and confessed she didn't know what to do. Luke immediately urged her to call 911. She followed the advice and called the emergency services. However, she had already lost precious minutes, which forced the ambulance to set off immediately. When the ambulance crew arrived at the scene, they found Susie outside the house, standing calmly with a cigarette in one hand and a drink in the other. Showing no signs of distress, she led the paramedics inside and gestured toward the bedroom without entering it. Inside, Bill was lying on the bed, still alive but in critical condition. He was rushed to the hospital, where he later passed away. The cause of death was clear: a weapon injury to the head. Beside him lay a weapon in a pool of blood. Initially, investigators suspected that he had harmed himself, but they decided to carry out a more thorough investigation before reaching any conclusions. Forensic experts began analyzing the scene. The unusually large volume of blood warranted a detailed investigation. Blood spatters were found on much of the furniture, on the wall near the bed, and even on the ceiling fan. Fortunately, a blood spatter expert was brought in to assist. The expert confirmed that Bill had died from a single wound to the head. The only fingerprints found on the weapon during testing were Bill's. Susie has consistently maintained her perspective on the story since the beginning, asserting that Bill suffered from prolonged depression, had a tendency to harm himself, and had expressed these thoughts to multiple people on several occasions. Some of her statements were corroborated by her relatives and friends, as well as Bill's. Bill, a businessman, had been facing mounting challenges in managing his dealership, which seemed to have worsened his mental health. However, Susie's behavior raised significant doubts. She does not seem to be a grieving widow. Instead, she discusses her husband's death calmly, as though it were merely a trivial matter. Still, this wasn't the primary reason investigators began to scrutinize her further. The most shocking detail emerged in the 12 hours following Bill's death. During this time, Jim, Bill's brother, arrived at Bill's residence intending to speak with Susie, offer her support, and try to piece together what had happened by observing the scene. To his surprise, when Jim went upstairs, he heard music and the laughter of women. When he knocked, Susie came out casually and explained that she was hosting a party with friends. Jim found her behavior to be deeply inappropriate and upsetting. Later, Jim became one of Susie's most vocal critics as she desperately tried to prove her innocence. It was discovered that the women attending the gathering had removed all the furniture and carpeting from the bedroom. Not only were they listening to music and socializing, but the most alarming revelation was that they had repainted the bedroom a different color. Police viewed these actions as obvious attempts to interfere with evidence. Despite these suspicious actions, the blood expert successfully reconstructed the sequence of the incident. It is now clear that the case had nothing to do with Bill's self-harm. Detectives became convinced that Susie was the one who had pulled the trigger. Based on evidence collected on the first day, there appeared to be little doubt remaining. The focus then shifted to the remaining pieces of furniture and the nightgown Susie had been wearing. After thorough analysis, the expert concluded that Bill had been murdered by his wife, who had attacked him in the head while he was asleep. Susie was shocked when accused and immediately sought legal help by hiring a lawyer. The financial difficulties in their family's marriage have been confirmed by multiple sources. Susie said that Bill's unsuccessful attempt to obtain a bank loan led him to harm himself. Bill's family was aware of his dire financial situation, but not everyone believed that Susie was completely innocent. Detectives interviewed a loan officer at the bank who had interacted with Bill. The officer recounted how Bill had visited the bank in a deeply distraught state, even breaking down in tears. Bill reportedly stated that, without approval for a $200,000 loan, he would die. Unfortunately, Bill's financial situation was bleak, and his loan application was rejected. The loan officer had no choice but to turn him down. Numerous witnesses attested to Bill's desperation and emotional turmoil. Despite this evidence of Bill's deteriorating mental health, suspicions about Susie remained strong. Her behavior following her husband's death was widely perceived as celebratory rather than mournful. This interpretation led to widespread public condemnation and further distrust of her character. However, her lawyer firmly maintained her innocence. Bill Mowbray, a businessman, applied for a bank loan to keep his business running and pay off existing debts. However, the bank's refusal devastated him. That evening, he returned home deeply distressed and barely interacted with anyone. Susie did her best to console him, but her efforts did little to ease his despair. In the final days of his life, Bill fell into a severe depression as he desperately searched for a solution to his financial crisis. Later, Susie shared that after this incident, Bill frequently spoke about ending his life. She tried to support him by accompanying him to a psychotherapist. The lawyer worked to find evidence that substantiated Susie's claims, and succeeded. Several of Bill's longtime friends revealed that, approximately a decade before the tragedy, Bill had attempted to end his life. This had occurred in the 1970s, before Susie and Bill married, which explained why Susie had never mentioned it. After meeting Susie, his life seemed to improve, and those close to him believed that his past struggles had been overcome. This information further reinforces the narrative that Bill has a history of self-harm. The defense attorney believed this evidence would strongly support Susie if the case went to trial. He dismissed the notion that Susie was implicated in the crime by the gathering at their house following the tragedy. Furthermore, he argued that the prosecution's case relied solely on circumstantial evidence, which could be easily challenged. Susie's unusual behavior was not enough to indicate that she might resort to violence. Bill's family, however, argued that Susie's actions demonstrated a complete lack of empathy toward him. Meanwhile, an outraged Jim demanded justice for Bill and insisted that the killer be held responsible. Investigators suspect that someone else may have been involved in the crime and are questioning the circumstances surrounding the incident. Specifically, they were puzzled why Bill chose to end his life while lying next to his wife in bed. Typically, individuals who wish to end their lives tend to prefer doing so in solitude. If Bill were to choose to end his own life, he would have two methods to consider: either keeping a loaded weapon nearby, such as placing it by his bed or under his pillow, or waking up in the middle of the night, retrieving the weapon, and returning to bed before using it. Susie claimed she didn't notice Bill getting up at night, though it's possible she simply didn't wake up. She mentioned that she had once handled her husband's weapon after discovering it under the pillow. She explained that he kept it in the bedroom for self-defense, adding that such behavior was typical among Texans. Detectives, however, questioned why there were no fingerprints on the weapon if Susie had truly picked it up. Susie claimed that Bill regularly cleaned and wiped the weapon, but investigators remained skeptical. They began scrutinizing the dynamics of Susie's and Bill's relationship. During the inquiry, they discovered that she had multiple extramarital affairs during her marriage, and, importantly, Bill was aware of them. After numerous acts of infidelity, she and her children had left him and moved to Austin. However, Bill eventually persuaded her to return, and they resumed living together. Despite this reconciliation, many believed the relationship remained deeply strained. Susie and Bill were preparing for a divorce and discussing how to divide their assets, which created significant tension and might have given her a motive to murder her husband. Susie's behavior following the incident raised further suspicions. After the incident, upon realizing that her husband was seriously injured but still alive, she chose not to call an ambulance, a decision that might have increased his chances of survival. Instead, she called a colleague, Bill Luke Roy. Susie claimed she was confused and unsure of what to do in such a situation, so she sought advice from a family friend. This initially led some to speculate that Luke might have been involved in the crime, though no evidence supported this theory. According to Luke, Susie's voice lacked any signs of panic during their phone call. Nonetheless, Luke advised her to contact emergency services, which Susie did without hesitation after speaking with him. When experts investigated the scene and examined Bill's body, they discovered a bullet wound in his left hand. Strangely, despite the close-range attack, Susie, Bill's wife, was not covered in blood. Forensic experts noted that an attack at point-blank range typically produces small blood droplets. However, Bill's right hand was found neatly tucked beneath the pillow, which makes the possibility of him causing harm to himself in this manner highly unlikely. The prosecution built a strong case with a solid motive: financial gain. Susie, Bill's wife, appeared to benefit greatly from her husband's death, particularly in terms of insurance. Shortly before his death, Bill had made significant changes to his insurance policy. He increased the payout amount to nearly $2 million but removed Susie as a beneficiary. Instead, he designated the payout to his daughter from a previous marriage, Christine. Susie had even contacted the insurance company in advance to confirm the details of the policy. Crucially, these changes to the policy were set to take effect just days after Bill's death. During her call with the insurance company, Susie uncovered crucial information, which indirectly pointed to the possibility of a motive to act quickly. With Bill weighed down by financial troubles, his death could secure the money needed to resolve their outstanding debts. Apparently, Bill had removed Susie from the beneficiary list due to a lack of trust in her and instead sought to provide lifelong financial security for his daughter. This situation raised several troubling implications. Firstly, if Bill had planned his own death, he likely would have waited for the amended insurance policy to officially take effect, which would have occurred in just a few days. Furthermore, as someone knowledgeable in legal and financial matters, he would have been aware of Texas laws regarding voluntary death. Specifically, insurance policies do not pay out compensation to beneficiaries if the insured dies voluntarily within 2 years of the policy's activation. This means all of Bill's intentions to secure his daughter's future were doomed from the outset. Detectives believed that Bill had no intention of ending his life willingly. When he spoke about such matters, it was likely to evoke pity or manipulate others, such as persuading the bank to grant him a loan. However, given the strange circumstances surrounding his death, it seemed he didn't end his life himself, someone might have helped him. Based on circumstantial evidence, Susie was arrested and charged with her husband's murder. At the trial, a key forensic method was used: blood spatter analysis. This technique, first introduced in the 1950s by Herbert MacDonald, played a critical role in providing evidence and substantiating the charges. MacDonald himself testified during Susie's trial, offering essential insights. Blood spatter analysis had been a foundational method in the U.S. justice system and widely accepted for years. However, in 2009, the National Academy of Sciences raised doubts about its reliability, emphasizing that accurate and meaningful use of the analysis requires significant expertise and experience. Evidence in Bill's murder case was analyzed by inexperienced experts, but this oversight was overlooked during the trial. Although blood sample analysis has been heavily criticized, it remains valuable and continues to be used, now exclusively by highly qualified and experienced specialists. In the past, doubts about this method had led to the reconsideration of several convictions. However, by the time of Susie's case, Herbert MacDonald's method was widely accepted and largely unquestioned. During the trial, Susie's ex-husband defended her, stating that he had never observed any signs of aggression throughout their relationship. He also stated that Susie was not even aware of how to use a weapon. Additionally, a family friend named Luke, Bill's business partner and Susie's initial point of contact after the incident, supported her and expressed his belief that Bill may have willingly ended his own life. Luke explained that he had planned to leave the car dealership due to work-related issues, and this decision had deeply affected Bill. In the final days of Bill's life, he reportedly struggled with loneliness. The prosecutor's office persisted in proving its case. To strengthen its argument, it presented the marital bed as evidence during the trial, complete with two mannequins representing Bill and Susie, as well as traces of Bill's blood that were still visible. This allowed the prosecution to vividly illustrate its version of what transpired on that tragic night. Despite the defense's efforts, the jury ultimately convicted Susie of murder, sentencing her on June 5, 1988, to life in prison without the possibility of parole. After the verdict, Susie still had a group of supporters who believed in her innocence, including her son, Wade, and her daughter from a previous marriage. Both worked tirelessly to overturn the conviction, firmly convinced that Susie had stood by her husband until the very end and was incapable of violence against him. While Susie served time in prison, Wade enrolled in law school and dedicated himself to meticulously reviewing the case. He searched for errors or misconduct by the prosecution and investigators, hoping to find grounds for an appeal. Wade collaborated closely with his mother's lawyer to challenge the verdict and fight for justice. The case required processing a massive amount of complex information, which made the effort time-consuming. Wade was determined to secure justice as Susie had already spent 8 years in prison. Eventually, Susie's lawyer submitted a critical appeal that could not be dismissed. During the prosecution's case, the blood spatter analysis played a key role, but serious concerns emerged about whether the forensic expert had been qualified to handle this aspect. The expert had examined over 40 stains found on the nightgown. Interestingly, the prosecution's main piece of evidence turned out to be its biggest weakness. The defense disputed the accuracy of the tests conducted on the nightgown, arguing that various substances, not just blood, could cause the fabric to glow. Moreover, the nightgown had never been specifically tested for blood, and since it was no longer available, its credibility as evidence was entirely compromised. The appeal was accepted, leading to a thorough reconsideration of the evidence before the 1990 retrial. The absence of blood spatter on the weapon can be explained as follows. The gunshot to Bill's left arm likely occurred while he was holding the weapon under the pillow, with his left hand positioned on the opposite side of his head. The shot caused an exit wound. Certain actions of the experts during the retrial seemed questionable. For instance, the forensic expert who conducted Bill's autopsy made a key statement. Although he admitted that he could not be absolutely certain Susie had killed Bill, he maintained, perhaps to protect his reputation, that Bill could not have harmed himself without external assistance. Given that only Bill and Susie were in the house, Susie was naturally seen as the prime suspect. Wade's legal studies and collaboration with attorneys proved invaluable. Together, they uncovered evidence of a conspiracy that violated Susie's constitutional right to a fair trial. A major revelation emerged when the prosecution brought in Herbert MacDonald to re-examine Susie's nightgown and the prior findings. Contrary to the prosecutor's expectations, MacDonald decisively refuted the arguments supporting Susie's guilt. However, Rather than sharing MacDonald's expert opinion, the prosecution deliberately concealed it and continued relying on the flawed evidence against Susie. Wade played a vital role in the fight for his mother's freedom. He now faced the challenge of presenting his findings to convince the jury. His analysis revealed deception on the prosecution's part, which violated the Brady Rule, a requirement for prosecutors to disclose all evidence that could potentially exonerate the defendant. MacDonald's findings were pivotal in exposing this misconduct. Finally, Susie's day in court arrived in January 1998. By then, the once vibrant woman had been deeply affected by her years in prison, reduced to a shadow of her former self. Yet, in her weary eyes, there remained a glimmer of hope. She continued to steadfastly maintain her innocence. Susie's friends, who attended the same unusual gathering where the bedroom was repainted after her husband's death, described the event as an odd prank. They explained that it was initiated by a woman attempting to cover up the unsettling red stains in the room. According to them, Susie was unaware that her actions would later lead to accusations of evidence tampering. Both friends defended her, with one stating that the room had not been cordoned off with police tape and no warning had been issued that the investigation was ongoing. In fact, investigators initially concluded that Bill's death was a result of self-harm and showed little interest in the scene. They had planned to close the case and archive it, allowing Susie to remain in the house without implementing any security measures, such as sealing the room with police tape. The other friend explained that the group merely wanted to help Susie, who hesitated to let her children return to a bedroom stained with blood. Influenced by alcohol, they decided to repaint the room before the kids came home. Neither friend believed that Susie was guilty of any wrongdoing. During the retrial, an unqualified expert who had analyzed Susie's nightgown admitted that his original testimony at her first trial was baseless and lacked scientific foundation. Forensic expert Herbert MacDonald reviewed the flawed methods used in the investigation and expressed disbelief. The stains were measured visually without proper tools, and there was no confirmation that the stains were even blood. As a result, the evidence was deemed unconvincing. Susie's lawyer presented a compelling argument during the trial, which led the jury to reconsider their stance. They began to entertain the possibility that Bill, Susie's husband, had voluntarily chosen to end his own life. Substantial evidence later emerged, outweighing the vague testimonies provided by several of Bill's friends. The defense strategy focused on one key factor underlying the tragedy: Bill's financial difficulties. After his loan application was denied, his business faced imminent collapse, pushing his family close to poverty. To ensure that his daughter from a previous marriage would receive a larger insurance payout, Bill is said to have decided to end his own life. He spent his remaining savings on increasing the life insurance payout for her. Bill's decision not to wait just a few additional days may have been driven by severe depression or a sudden deterioration in his mental health, which could have left him incapable of fully understanding the legal implications. Accounts of Bill's behavior in the days leading up to his death supported this conclusion. The defense attorney believed their case had been effectively argued. However, during the closing arguments, Susie unexpectedly lost control. As the prosecution delivered its final remarks, she screamed that she had not killed her husband and collapsed in tears. This emotional outburst took everyone by surprise. On one hand, the jury recognized the sincerity in Susie's tears and assertions of innocence. On the other hand, her uncontrolled aggression complicated the situation. Deliberations over the verdict lasted for 4 hours of tense uncertainty. Although no definitive resolution was reached regarding Susie's guilt or innocence, she was ultimately acquitted of all charges on January 23, 1998. Despite her acquittal, she continued to face opposition, with critics focusing heavily on her behavior throughout the trial. While Susie's actions were undoubtedly unusual at times, her supporters, including her son and daughter, attributed her behavior to the emotional toll and stress she endured during the ordeal. Her opponents, however, claimed that her outburst during the trial was a calculated attempt to manipulate the jury. In contrast, her lawyer argued that the outburst was unplanned, insisting that such a risky tactic would have been ill-advised, particularly since the defense had already presented substantial evidence that might have backfired with the jury. During subsequent hearings, it was revealed that the nightgown had never been used as evidence. This omission raised concerns among the investigative team, as items of such significance rarely vanish without explanation. Speculation arose that the prosecution, facing heavy criticism for their strategy, may have intentionally disposed of the nightgown to prevent further examination. This theory gained traction as many believed the nightgown might have undermined their case, particularly given the opinion of Herbert MacDonald, whose expertise could have discredited their claims. Faced with mounting challenges, the prosecution seemingly had no viable path to continue their case. Susie Mowbray was acquitted on her 50th birthday, turning the occasion into a celebratory milestone. She expressed her gratitude to her son, Wade, describing it as the best anniversary gift she had ever received. In a 2001 interview, she reflected on her release, noting that others who had been wrongfully convicted alongside her had already been freed for 3 years. Susie had spent nearly a decade in prison and shared her hope that her children would feel proud of their mother. However, not everyone supported the verdict. Bill's first wife and his daughter, Christine, believed the outcome was unjust, remaining convinced that Susie had evaded accountability for murder. After Bill's death, his first wife revealed that Susie had urgently sold off all of his belongings to secure money. This led to a fierce legal battle between Bill's first wife and Susie over his inheritance. Ultimately, no one received the life insurance payout. Susie had once planned to write a book about her struggles, but since 2002, there has been no news about her. During that time, she went to court in an attempt to reclaim Bill's insurance payout, but she ultimately lost the case. Susie's son, Wade, initially pursued a legal career but eventually left the field to provide advice to other clergymen. Interestingly, Susie, who had previously sought public attention and appeared in her husband's advertising campaigns in the 1980s, completely disappeared from public view after her failed attempt to secure the insurance funds. She did not attend the TV show in 2021 that covered her case, though her lawyer did. The lawyer described her situation as a tragedy, emphasizing that the businessman's widow had spent so many years behind bars, which had destroyed her life, while insisting he had always believed in her innocence. Hello friends. Welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. The case of Marty Hill. Marty Hill, 42, lives in a cozy little town called Prairie Village, Kansas, USA. She is energetic, cheerful, and kind. From a young age, she was drawn to fine art, dreaming of becoming an artist or designer. To pursue this dream, she worked hard, completed her studies, and gained the necessary educational background. Eventually, she fulfilled her dream by working in the design studio of a clothing company. At the company, Marty is always highly regarded for his outstanding achievements and reliability. So, when she failed to show up for work on September 8, 2010, without any notice, everyone immediately suspected that something was wrong. No one knew what had happened, and she had not requested any leave. Initially, her colleagues hoped she might just be running late. They tried calling her but received no response and decided to wait a little longer. An important meeting was scheduled for 10 a.m., and Marty's attendance was deemed essential. Her absence worried everyone since she was always responsible and fully aware of the meeting's importance. She is usually deeply involved with the group and consistently reports any issues, so her silence in this case is unusual. Growing increasingly uneasy, one of her friends tried calling her repeatedly, but the calls went unanswered. Overcome with fear, the friend began to break down in tears, sensing deep in her heart that something terrible might have happened to Marty. A friend decided to find out what had happened to Marty. One of her colleagues offered to visit her house and check on her. He arrived at her quiet residential neighborhood at 11:30 a.m. and knocked on her door, but there was no answer. This seemed odd, especially since her car was parked in the driveway, suggesting she should have been home. He walked around the house but saw nothing unusual, although he couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. The unsettling silence made him uneasy, so he returned to his car. The colleague returned to the office and discussed the situation with the others. They decided it was necessary to call the police to check on Marty. Because Marty had a 15-year-old daughter who was at school at the time, they agreed not to alarm her until they obtained more information about Marty's whereabouts. Eventually, the police were contacted, and the colleagues stayed near Marty's driveway, waiting for the police to arrive. The police arrived at the scene within minutes. When the officer knocked on the door, there was no response, and there were no signs of forced entry. Looking through a window, he noticed a woman's purse sitting on the kitchen table, which indicated that Marty should have been inside. Concerned, the officer decided to check the door, suspecting she might be unwell and in need of help. To his surprise, the door was unlocked. The officer entered the house and searched the first and second floors but found nothing out of the ordinary. He then proceeded to check the basement. Using a flashlight, the officer realized there were no lights in the basement. As he descended to the very bottom, he spotted someone lying in a large pool of blood, curled up in a fetal position. The dim light revealed a gruesome scene. The room was splattered with so much blood that it resembled a torture chamber. At first, the police thought the victim was a man due to the large amount of blood, but upon closer inspection, they couldn't even determine the victim's gender. Based on the scene, they concluded that the person was dead. However, to their horror, the victim suddenly turned around and looked directly at them. The police discovered a severe wound on the victim's throat and observed that her face was so swollen, disfigured it resembled a gruesome, bloody mess. Believing the victim was on the verge of death, an officer leaned in and repeatedly asked, "Who did this?" Despite his efforts, the victim struggled to breathe and was unable to speak. Prior to questioning, the officer had already called for medical assistance. Though still alive, the victim was unable to reveal the identity of her attacker. The victim was rushed to the nearest hospital due to her critical condition, which made identifying her difficult. Her injuries were concentrated on her head and face, including multiple skull fractures, facial fractures, a concussion, and cerebral swelling. The wound was particularly devastating, slicing through muscles and vital blood vessels. Medical experts estimated her chances of survival at no more than 20%. Finally, the victim was identified to be Marty Hill, the owner of the home. Against all odds, the doctors managed to save her life. Attention immediately turned to her teenage daughter, Mackenzie, who was contacted right away. Mackenzie was in complete shock and had no idea what had transpired at their home. Upon hearing of the brutal attack, family members rushed to the hospital to be with Marty. The extent of her suffering was unimaginable, and her injuries were so severe that even her own mother didn't recognize her. Unfortunately, the doctors all gave the same grim prognosis regarding her chances of survival. Her condition was serious, but at least it was somewhat manageable. Family members took turns staying by her bedside every day. The situation was so overwhelming that they felt a mix of anger and helplessness. Her son, Stephen, felt the most anger. Living in Texas at the time, he returned home to be with his mother and offer his support. Stephen was the first person to enter the basement where his mother had been found. After the forensic investigator examined the house, they emerged from the basement and strictly prohibited anyone else from entering due to the gruesome nature of the scene. While the relatives grieved, Stephen cleaned up the blood himself. Detectives investigating the tragedy were baffled, unable to determine who could have committed such an act or why. Marty's family and friends were equally perplexed, as no one could imagine her having an enemy capable of such violence. Investigators searched for clues in her personal life, workplace, and relationships with her children but found nothing unusual. The crime was determined to be unrelated to abuse, as Marty's clothes remained intact, a conclusion later confirmed by the Armed Forces analysis. There was no indication of theft, nothing was missing, and the house showed no signs of forced entry. The circumstances of the crime were shrouded in mystery. Even Marty herself was unable to provide any information about the identity of her attacker. The police interviewed Marty's neighbors, but none of them were able to provide any significant information. The only clue reported was a sighting of a red, broken pickup truck near Marty's house at around 8 a.m., driven by a young, light-skinned, short man. This timing aligned with the approximate time of the attack determined by detectives. The officers followed up by visiting the sewing company where Marty worked to interview her colleagues, hoping to identify someone matching the description of the driver. However, this lead turned into another dead end, as none of her co-workers could offer useful information or suggest who might have been driving the pickup truck. Detectives then shifted their focus to Marty's family. They spoke with Marty's mother, Shirley Roth, who provided a potentially valuable lead. Shirley revealed that her daughter had not been romantically involved with anyone since divorcing her ex-husband 7 years earlier. Despite their divorce, they maintained regular contact because they shared custody of their daughter. Shirley explained that, following the divorce, Marty had dedicated herself entirely to her work and children and had shown no interest in dating. In Shirley's opinion, the only person who seemed like a potential suspect was Marty's ex-husband. This lead warranted further investigation, especially since Marty remained unconscious and unable to provide information herself. Detectives continued to speak with family members to identify Marty's ex-husband. Their children were quick to defend their father. Their daughter, Mackenzie, a high school student, took offense at the suggestion that her father could be a suspect. She asserted that her father could not have done such a thing, describing him as calm, non-confrontational, and someone who maintained a good relationship with his ex-wife and children. Their son, Stephen, also rejected the suspicion, stating that his father was incapable of committing the crime. Despite this, detectives could not dismiss the theory and decided to investigate it thoroughly. The police then visited Marty's ex-husband at his home. He was fully cooperative, invited them inside, and answered their questions openly. He appeared deeply affected by the incident, expressing that he still cared for Marty and was distressed by what had happened. He expressed relief that she had survived and shared that he was praying for her recovery. Although there was nothing initially suspicious, the police still needed to verify his alibi. He told them that, on the morning of the attack, he had taken his daughter to school before going to work. To confirm his statement, the police spoke with his daughter, Mackenzie, who was living with her grandmother, while they worked on verifying the details he had provided. A DNA sample was taken from him, though analysis would require time. For Mackenzie, the prohibition against seeing her father created additional hardship, making this a challenging period for everyone involved. The police also collected DNA samples from under Marty's nails, along with hair follicles found on her clothing. After comparing this evidence with the ex-husband's DNA, all suspicions about him were completely dismissed. His DNA did not match, and his alibi was verified. As a result, the ex-husband was officially cleared from the list of suspects, much to Mackenzie's relief. The family was finally able to reconnect and support one another as they waited for Marty to regain consciousness. Meanwhile, Marty's family tried to piece together what had happened and figure out who might have attacked her. Her mother, Shirley, recalled that not long before the incident, the grandmother's house had been broken into and robbed. This raised fears that the entire family could be targeted by a stalker intent on carrying out violent acts. However, the police had no definite answers, leaving the family engulfed in fear and paranoia. They had no clue who the perpetrator could be and clung to hope that Marty would recover and reveal what had truly happened. The family also recalled that, shortly before the attack, a handyman had visited Marty's house to change the locks. This handyman worked for B&J Construction, a company her mother and grandmother had trusted and hired for years. Coincidentally, he was the only unfamiliar person who had interacted with Marty in recent months. This raised suspicions that the handyman, who often did repair work for the family, might be connected to both the robbery and the assault. The police turned their attention to Brian Pennington, the handyman who had regularly visited Marty's house, her mother's house, and her grandmother's house to handle household repairs and maintenance. At the time, Brian was 26 years old, married, and the father of 2 children. He lived about an hour and a half away in a small town called Leeton, Missouri, with a population of around 500. On September 10, 2010, detectives decided to visit Brian's home. When they arrived, they immediately noticed a broken red pickup truck in the driveway, which matched a description provided by neighbors of a suspicious vehicle. However, the truck did not have license plates, so they were unable to confirm the match. Inside the house, they found Brian, who was cooperative and permitted the officers to enter his kitchen. He answered their questions openly. When asked about the truck, Brian explained that he didn't drive it because it had no license plates. He also mentioned that his last visit to Marty's house had been 3 to 4 days before the attack, during which he had checked the basement equipment. Brian didn't contact the police after seeing on the news that Marty had been attacked. He explained that he didn't know anything and couldn't provide any useful information about the case. Brian wasn't very familiar with Marty. Their interactions had been limited to working together on repairing her house. Although he considered her a respectable woman, that was all he could share with the authorities. However, detectives began to question his account. Their suspicions were triggered by the fresh scratches on his face, which might have been caused during a confrontation with Marty. When asked about these marks, he explained that they were caused by a dog that had scratched him while he was playing in the yard the day before the detectives came to visit. He acted fearful when accused of being involved in the crime, insisting that he was incapable of such an act. Brian provided an alibi, prompting investigators to verify his story. When detectives spoke to Brian's wife, Jessica, they noticed her odd behavior from the outset. She appeared hesitant, seemed afraid to disclose the truth, dodged direct questions, and mentioned there had been tension in their relationship lately. Jessica stated that her husband had been at home that morning, sleeping in another room, and added that the last time he had worked at Marty's house was about a month earlier. She also corroborated Brian's claim that the scratches on his face were caused by a dog. However, her demeanor suggested she was not being truthful. Detectives doubted her account, and she was taken to the station for further questioning. Authorities suspected Jessica might either be an accomplice to the crime or trying to shield the killer. Before leaving Brian's house, the police asked him whether they would find anything suspicious if they searched the property. Brian confidently stated that they wouldn't find anything and even agreed to let them look around. However, in the laundry basket, at the very bottom, they discovered a pair of jeans with suspicious stains. Brian explained that the stains weren't blood but merely machine oil left over from working on a pickup truck. He allowed the police to take the jeans for testing and voluntarily provided his DNA samples for comparison. The items were immediately sent to the forensic lab, where tests confirmed the stains were blood, not oil. However, additional time was needed to extract the DNA profile and compare it. While detectives awaited the test results, Marty regained consciousness in the hospital 12 days after the attack. Although she was able to communicate shortly thereafter, her initial days out of unconsciousness were clouded by confusion. During this time, she experienced constant pain and discomfort. It's not surprising that Marty needed to take a large number of medications during her recovery. Her poor health may have stemmed from her reliance on these drugs, in addition to the severe injuries she suffered. Despite the extensive brain damage she endured, her memory remained largely intact. Marty informed the police that Brian Pennington was the one who had attacked her. She described that morning's incident as starting entirely normally. She woke up early, got ready for work, and followed her usual routine. Around 7:30 a.m., she heard a car stop in front of her house but didn't pay it much attention. Soon after, there was a knock at the door. It was Brian, who had worked on her house about a month earlier. Marty found his visit odd from the beginning. It was unplanned and too early in the morning. However, she reassured herself, thinking he might have been working nearby or had forgotten a tool during his last visit. Although she was hesitant to open the door, she ultimately decided to do so. The two had a brief conversation. Brian was polite and friendly, which helped ease her concerns. Brian explained that he had heard Marty was planning to sell her house and wanted to alert her to a problem he had noticed during the previous renovation. He insisted it was important and offered to show her the issue in the basement. Curiosity overcame her, and she agreed to follow him downstairs. She recounted that everything happened very quickly. Initially, they were just walking downstairs, but an unsettling feeling suddenly came over her. Brian grabbed her and pushed her down the stairs, causing her head to hit hard against the concrete floor. Brian violently attacked Marty, choking her until she lost consciousness. Later, Marty explained that her memories of the incident were hazy, as though she were trapped in a fog. She occasionally regained consciousness, only to lose it again shortly afterward. Eventually, a policeman arrived at her home, and she was taken to the hospital. Investigators needed evidence to support Marty's account. Tests were conducted on a pair of jeans found in Brian's laundry basket, which revealed traces of Marty's blood. DNA samples taken from beneath her fingernails also matched his DNA. Law enforcement officers obtained an arrest warrant for Brian and visited his home, but he was not there. The search for him intensified, and soon police in the city discovered a damaged red pickup truck. Jessica was behind the wheel, and Brian was sitting in the passenger seat, visibly disheveled. Authorities charged Brian with attempted murder and robbery, setting bail at $1 million. The news stunned Marty's mother and grandmother, who had been in contact with Brian for years and trusted him as a professional handyman. Brian frequently worked for Marty's family, completing various household repairs. Tragically, it was Marty's mother who had recommended him to her daughter, leaving her with a deep sense of guilt. The family struggled to comprehend this senseless act of aggression. Brian's cruelty seemed inexplicable, and no clear motive emerged. Although he provided no explanation for his actions, experts were left baffled by the sheer brutality of the attack. Doctors were amazed that Marty had survived it all. Brian's violence extended far beyond simply choking Marty into unconsciousness. He threw her down a staircase, causing her to land headfirst on a concrete floor, fracturing her skull. He continued his attack relentlessly, beating her and slashing her throat. Marty struggled to comprehend what she could have done to warrant such a terrible fate. After sustaining severe head injuries, she faced challenges with her balance, although she eventually managed to walk independently. Shortly after emerging from a coma, she developed visual impairments, along with hearing and cognitive difficulties. Her family noticed that Marty seemed like a shadow of her former self, but they remained hopeful for her recovery. At times, she would lapse into long periods of thoughtfulness, which deeply concerned her loved ones, especially her daughter. Doctors refrained from making a definitive prognosis. While acknowledging the challenges Marty faced, they emphasized that her survival against the odds suggested that recovery was possible. After spending about a month in the hospital, Marty was finally discharged. During her recovery period, she became closer to her 16-year-old daughter, Mackenzie, whose birthday occurred while she was still in the hospital. Mackenzie was deeply touched by a card her mother wrote for her, even though the handwriting resembled that of a child. She recognized the long journey ahead and understood her vital role in supporting her mother as she gradually healed. Marty faced significant emotional challenges after the attack, struggling to reconcile how someone she had trusted deeply could turn out to be a vicious criminal capable of unprovoked violence. Seeking solace, she turned to her local church for emotional support. Meanwhile, Marty's family was determined to ensure that Brian faced justice and received a lengthy prison sentence. The prosecutor's office had overwhelming evidence to press charges against him, including physical proof, Marty's detailed account of the attack, scratches on Brian's face, DNA matches, and items stained with blood. The only missing piece was a clear motive. Brian had neither attempted to abuse Marty nor stolen anything from her home. His actions were simply a deliberate and calculated effort to kill her while working in her house. This act of violence was sudden and seemed to lack any apparent provocation. Marty had no prior conflicts with Brian, and relations between him and other women in her family had been peaceful. However, as police investigated Brian's background, they uncovered a troubling history of criminal activity. He had been convicted in 26 separate cases, most of which were related to domestic violence. His ex-wife and former girlfriends had reported him to the police numerous times. Jessica admitted that she had shielded him out of fear of becoming his next target, as his behavior was systematically abusive. Brian frequently threatened her, exhibiting a clear pattern of cruelty. Jessica testified for the prosecution during the trial, stating that Brian was not home on the night of the attack. She explained that he had been away for hours and only returned around noon, after Marty was assaulted. Upon his return, his clothes were covered in blood. When questioned, he claimed it was machine oil but offered no further explanation. Jessica also refuted his claim that the scratches were allegedly caused by the dog, revealing that he had forced her to lie under the threat of being killed. She provided detailed accounts of their married life, describing him as abusive, both physically and emotionally. During the trial, Brian was visibly shocked when Marty appeared alive in court to testify against him. Jessica, his wife, also testified for the prosecution, presenting evidence that contradicted his statements. Moreover, none of Brian's claims were corroborated during the hearings. Jessica submitted cell phone records showing that, at approximately 8 a.m. on the morning of the attack, she had tried to contact Brian. Geolocation data confirmed that he was near Marty's house at the time. As the evidence against Brian continues to build, he has no viable path to acquittal. To avoid a prolonged and traumatic trial, Brian was offered a plea bargain. Although he could have faced up to 40 years in prison, the deal reduced his sentence to 28 years. However, on the day his sentence was to be announced, Brian unexpectedly attempted to withdraw the plea agreement and plead guilty instead. The court rejected his request, citing no valid justification for accepting it. During the final courtroom proceedings, Marty directly asked Brian why he had attacked her and nearly killed her, but he refused to provide a reason or make any closing statements. Marty is still recovering from the devastating attack, which left permanent scars on her face and neck. The injuries have distorted her facial features and affected her mobility. Despite these challenges, Marty remains determined and continues to train rigorously, believing she can regain her former self or even surpass it. In interviews, she often reflects on how someone only 26 years old could commit such a cruel act. Her resilience and self-belief have helped her heal from this violent incident, strengthening her resolve in the process. Marty returned to her routine fairly quickly and has become even more active. She took up kickboxing to learn self-defense, and sports have played a significant role in her recovery. She also created a website aimed at supporting others who have experienced traumatic events, using her personal story to inspire and encourage healing. In addition to these efforts, Marty continues to work as a designer for a clothing company, channeling her creativity into her art as a way to manage anxiety and stress. She credits her daughter, Mackenzie, as the cornerstone of her recovery and is deeply grateful for her unwavering support. Recently, Marty published a book that details the horrific incident that changed her life, with the hope of inspiring others to overcome adversity through resilience. She now actively works as a motivational speaker, meeting with various communities and offering the same support that helped her rebuild her life. As for Brian Pennington, her attacker, he remains in prison and is estranged from his family, including his mother, ex-wife, and children, who have all cut ties with him. Hello everyone, today we will learn about another case. The case of Clelia Medina. Early in the morning on Sunday, February 17, 2008, a man was walking with his dog when he suddenly noticed that the dog was attracted to something strange on the ground. Looking closely, he realized it was a series of drops forming a path. He began to follow them, moving parallel to the canal, not far from Lambersart, France. The drops continued, leading him to the very shore where he noticed a body half submerged in the water. It was swollen and very pale. The man immediately reported it to the police. In the name of law enforcement, forensic experts began to carefully examine the area and the body itself. However, there was nothing that could help identify the female victim. It was not possible to find a handbag that might have contained documents, a mobile phone, or bank cards. The body was taken for an autopsy, and the police continued to investigate the area around the canal for any clues about the identity of the victim. While the medical examiner was working in his office, detectives checked the databases of missing persons to find anything that could help identify the body. In this area, no recent disappearances had been recorded. When it became obvious that the unidentified victim could not be recognized, forensic scientists began searching the canal bank for clues indicating the identity of the deceased or the perpetrator. In the relatively small area where the body was found, cigarette butts and anything that could contain human DNA were collected. To ensure that nothing was missed, a team of divers was called in to check the bottom of the canal. This decision turned out to be correct. One diver managed to retrieve a car jack from the bottom, found just a meter away from the body. The jack, belonging to a standard set for a wing car, had a serial number indicating it was used in a vehicle produced in 1997. It had been in the water for quite a long time, so traces from its surface could have washed away. However, during the examination, Human bloodstains were found. They continued to collect data. Initially, it was believed that the victim had been strangled, as characteristic marks remained on her neck. However, the forensic expert concluded that the cause of death was multiple strong blows to the head with a blunt object. The location and shape of the marks resembled those made by a car jack. There were suggestions that the girl could have died in a road accident, but the longer they attempted to prove this, the less plausible the theory seemed. It was soon decided to abandon this idea. It clearly indicated a methodical beating after which the body was simply thrown into the water. A toxicological examination showed that the victim was either intoxicated from alcohol or under the influence of prohibited substances. The deceased was fully dressed, and no signs of abuse were found. At the same time, there were no marks on her hands that would indicate she had fought for her life. The attack had likely come as a surprise to her, and she was unable to defend herself. According to the forensic expert, she died around 5 a.m. The police had only one clue that could help solve the mystery of her identity: a small stamp on her palm that had miraculously not washed away in the water. Such stamps are given to club visitors at the entrance, allowing security to recognize them without the need to check passes or flyers. Typically, these stamps are unique to each establishment and are not replicated. It was quickly discovered that the victim had visited the Buccaneer Club located nearby shortly before her death. Detectives arrived at the club, immediately spoke with the administration and employees, providing them with a description of the deceased. Two young men recognized the girl because she occasionally attended the disco, but no one knew her name. The detectives managed to access the recordings from the CCTV cameras. Thanks to that, the victim was identified. She had arrived at the club the day before she was found in the canal, apparently leaving Buccaneer around 3 a.m. and being killed by 5 a.m. What happened to her between 3 a.m. and 5 a.m. remained unknown. The police spoke to regular patrons and staff in the hope that someone recognized her from the CCTV footage, but no valuable clues about her identity emerged. So far, no missing persons reports had been filed. The police were left with only one option to identify the deceased: to hold a press conference and appeal to the public through the media. Detectives provided a detailed description of the victim and showed footage from the club's CCTV cameras. Within a few hours, a woman admitting that she was the mother of 18-year-old Clelia Medina. She reported that her daughter had gone to the club about a day before these events and had not returned or been in touch. She immediately became concerned. Relatives and friends had no idea where Clelia might have spent the night. No one had seen Clelia after visiting the club, which caused anxiety and prompted her mother to search for her. Approximately 36 hours had passed when she managed to contact the local police station in Lille, but received the standard excuse that law enforcement officers did not want to waste time looking for a girl who had simply gone on a spree after the club and was likely spending time with friends or a boyfriend. When she saw a news program about the police announcing the discovery of a body and the terrible circumstances surrounding the tragedy, she initially tried to dismiss any bad thoughts about it possibly being her daughter. However, the worry persisted. She literally felt that something bad had happened to her daughter and feared that it was Clelia's body that had been found in the canal. She acted extremely worried and was very agitated, providing somewhat confused information due to her emotional state. Therefore, the police decided to verify the information with Clelia's cousin, who had been with Clelia that evening. The young man confirmed some of the details provided by Clelia's mother. He helped to clarify valuable information such as the clothing and piercing locations that Clelia had. The victim's identity was almost completely matched. Clelia's mother was notified of the coincidence and was invited to identify the body. All doubts were finally dispelled. The mother was shocked by her daughter's tragic death, and she immediately began to cry. She struggled to understand who could have done this, as her daughter was an ordinary girl who did not associate with problematic people. According to her cousin, they had planned to go to Buccaneer Club together, the seal of which was found on her hand. He described his relationship with Clelia as very friendly and warm. They communicated well, supported each other. That evening, everyone was in good spirits. From the very beginning, Clelia's mother had been worried about her daughter attending the party. She felt strongly that Clelia should not go. To calm her mother, Clelia explained that they would not be walking home alone and that everything would be fine. Despite the fact that her cousin took her to the club, he did not intend to stay there long. Clelia managed to reassure her mother by telling her that her ex-boyfriend, 19-year-old Julian Saley, was supposed to drive her home. The whole family knew him well and trusted him. Julian Saley and Clelia had been in a relationship for about a year, which had ended a couple of months before Clelia's death. As Clelia's mother noted, even after the breakup, they continued to communicate as friends. Law enforcement officers decided to check the records of telephone conversations, which verified that Clelia had indeed called her ex-boyfriend when she left the club. However, the police did not have time to visit his home, as he came to the station on his own initiative to talk to the investigators. Julian was eager to help because he was worried about what had happened. In his statement, he emphasized that Clelia had contacted him after he left the cinema. He promptly went to the club, where he picked her up in his car in the parking lot. They spent some time together at his house, but at about 4:30 in the morning, Clelia headed home. Julian believed that she could have been attacked during this time. The police immediately questioned why he did not drive Clelia home at such a late hour. He explained that it was only a short walk left to get home, as the houses were located close together. It was already getting light, he was very tired and drunk, so cannot take her home. Clelia herself did not want to impose on anyone and was not afraid for her safety. Unfortunately, Julian simply went to bed and turned off his mobile phone to avoid being disturbed. Until he woke up, he could not reach Clelia but did not think much of it, believing that she could be spending time with someone new, as there was no romantic relationship between them anymore. However, upon learning about the tragedy in the Medina family, Julian felt compelled to help with the investigation, so provided his testimony. The detectives, however, immediately suspected that he might not just want to help. Such behavior is often seen in murderers attempting to divert suspicion from themselves. Thus, they decided not to let him leave too quickly, hoping he would either incriminate himself or provide genuine assistance in the investigation. Suspicion grew stronger as Julian reacted very calmly to the details of the crime. He did not show any emotions when looking at the disfigured image, and he appeared neither upset nor shocked. His lack of reaction to the details of his ex-girlfriend's death, combined with the fact that he was the last person to see her, made him a person of interest to the detectives. It is known that in such cases, exes are often involved, who kill out of jealousy, resentment, or revenge. To establish or refute this, the investigators asked Julian to show them his car. The detective specifically did not mention the jack that had been found in the canal. He agreed to this request without hesitation. According to his confession, he arrived at the police station in the same car in which he had driven Clelia from the club to his home. The policeman went out into the street with him, and in the parking lot, they found a notch indicating the year of manufacture of the car matched the jack. As soon as the door was opened, they felt a very strong smell of cleaning products. The interior was excessively clean for a young guy. It seemed that a very thorough cleaning had been carried out recently. Nevertheless, Julian immediately justified himself by saying that he had bought a new car only 10 days prior, and the previous owner had cleaned it well before selling it. The police were most interested in the possibility of blood being present. Perhaps Julian could have attacked Clelia in his car or transported the body after the attack. When the mat in the trunk was lifted, they found several suspicious dark red drops that were collected for further analysis. However, none of these stains belonged to Clelia. Nevertheless, Julian continued to be considered the main suspect. It was believed that this was an attack based on passion, so the killer must have known the victim well. Furthermore, the make of the car matched the jack was found at the bottom of the canal. Julian seemed ideal as a suspect based on all the criteria. After, they found one valuable clue, a blood stain on one of Julian's sneakers. After examination, it was possible to prove that the blood belonged to Clelia, but it was not possible to date it with precision. Julian insisted that the stain appeared by chance when Clelia had a nosebleed about a month before the tragedy. However, his words could not be confirmed or refuted, so this evidence turned out to be indirect. Even Clelia's family was sure that Julian could not have done this. he had always been a very nice guy. Clelia's mother believed wholeheartedly that he was not capable of murder. She commented that Clelia was almost crazy about Julian based on his appearance. He was very kind, loving, and gave Clelia many gifts. However, their relationship was not entirely smooth. They often argued. Julian as an accomplished young man for his age. He grew up in a strict but loving family in Lille, France. From an early age, he was interested in sports, especially football, which he played with his father. He was not prone to violence and avoided fights, despite being in perfect shape. However, he was forced to drop out of school because of football, wanting to build a sports career, and simply chose training over textbooks. His parents supported their son's decision, especially since he was mature enough for his age. At the same time, they described him as charming but very jealous. They mentioned that he could become upset over a random photo of a stranger on the internet that Clelia was looking at. As their relationship progressed, Julian became more and more jealous. Due to such tumultuous dynamics, they eventually broke up. Despite the tensions, they continued to maintain friendly relations, and everything seemed normal. Except for the circumstantial evidence against Julian, there was no concrete proof. He was released pending further investigation. Then, Julian was arrested and charged with Clelia's murder. He spent about a year in prison, but his lawyer managed to get him released before his trial. Julian repeatedly appealed, claiming there was insufficient evidence to convict him, and was released on bail. However, this lasted until 2011, when his formal trial began. A rather controversial trial lay ahead. From the very beginning, the situation was tense, partly because Clelia's family had changed their opinion about Julian over the lengthy investigation period. They became convinced, based on several dubious facts, that the deceased's ex-boyfriend was indeed a criminal. Clelia's family now demanded punishment for the supposed killer. At this stage, it was necessary to assess the mental health of the suspect. In June 2008, Julian was visited by an expert psychiatrist, who noted no deviations. Julian willingly made contact and described in detail the events related to Clelia. He admitted that there had indeed been several conflicts which ended in slaps to the face. Although he did not think this was normal, he justified himself, citing jealousy regarding Clelia and claiming that she had stolen from him multiple times. After the examination, the specialist concluded that Julian was completely in his right mind and capable of appearing in court. Tension was literally in the air. The defense team escalated the situation to the point where a fight broke out right in the courtroom. Several people were slightly injured, so the trial was postponed because of this unpleasant incident and the subsequent bureaucratic red tape. Everything was delayed for another year until 2012. From February 2009 until the start of the trial in June 2012, Julian lived with his paternal aunts near Paris. She immediately noticed how angry he was. At first, they thought it was connected to the slander against him. However, his discontent grew as the trial approached. Meanwhile, the Medina family accused Julian's lawyer of unnecessarily dragging out the proceedings, which only heightened tensions. The first witnesses began to speak at the meetings. There was a mutual friend of Clelia and Julian who recalled that all three of them had once been driving in a car together after their romantic relationship had ended. Julian had even started dating a new girl, who happened to be one of Clelia's close friends. This situation made she very upset and jealous. Despite their breakup, a conflict ensued between them, which even escalated to physical confrontation. They exchanged blows. At one point, Clelia even attempted to jump out of the moving car, but Julian managed to pull her back inside. By the time the car reached her friend's house, Clelia finally exited and continued yelling at Julian from the street. He tried to calm her down, but she simply waved her hand dismissively and left the scene. This friend was convinced this was not an isolated incident, as outbursts of jealousy and aggression were repeated throughout their relationship. In addition to this event, Clelia's parents recalled several instances during family vacations with Julian where he lost control. They once caught him walking around the apartment with a weapon. However, he had managed to convince Clelia's relatives that it was just a failed joke. They now understood the situation was much more serious. From the very beginning, Clelia had been in great danger. Another friend of Julian recounted an incident where, in a fit of rage, he began to choke one of his girlfriends. The once pleasant, sociable, and good-natured Julian was now portrayed as a monster capable of losing control at any moment. So, the change in the Medina family's attitude toward him did not seem strange. Julian had lied about the time. He told the police that Clelia left his house at 4:30 a.m. Detectives managed to track their mobile phones and prove that they were still together at 5 a.m., which is when Clelia was believed to have died. Subsequently, Clelia's phone unexpectedly turned off at 5:10 a.m. Previously, during an interrogation, Julian said that attempted to contact Clelia again but could not get a response. Detectives believed the call to his ex-girlfriend was made intentionally to create an alibi. Shortly thereafter, Julian's phone also turned off for several hours. Investigators suspected he deliberately turned off his devices to avoid being tracked. Despite all the circumstantial evidence against him, Julian continued to insist on his innocence. His lawyer argued that none of this evidence proved his guilt beyond a reasonable doubt. Throughout the investigation, detectives tried to extract a confession from Julian, but he steadfastly maintained his innocence. The pressure from authorities led him to feel embittered. He claimed that the persecution caused him to face difficulties in real life and to suffer from insults, unfounded accusations. Phone records revealed something intriguing. Julian's new girlfriend also tried to contact Clelia shortly before the murder. At first, she did not disclose any details as to why she tried to contact Clelia at all. However, in 2011, the girl spoke to detectives and made a rather dubious statement. According to her, she felt guilty that Clelia was dead. The reason for her fears stemmed from the fact that, as a close friend of Clelia, she was dating Julian. This clearly caused great discontent for his ex-girlfriend, who took every opportunity to contact him. On that fateful night, Julian's new girlfriend decided to act on her feelings. She did not like Clelia as such attention directed at the guy. She believed that this was the impetus for another conflict between the exes, which ended tragically. When the police received this statement, they were puzzled and decided to explore this new details. The application ended up at the station, and detectives tried to find out if it was possible that she was an accomplice. They insisted that Julian's new girlfriend may have unintentionally provoked the attack but did not pursue such a goal intentionally. According to her, she had been afraid to admit it because she feared her boyfriend's reaction. The neck of the deceased showed clear signs of strangulation, as if her throat had been squeezed with bare hands. Apparently, the victim could not have been killed in this way, so the criminal used a metal jack from the car. Although it was inconvenient, it quickly became the instrument that ended the innocent girl's life. The killer inflicted a large number of blows to her head and face, which proved fatal. The degree of cruelty was astounding. He broke her facial bones. The prosecutor addressed the jury, stating that leaving such a dangerous person at large was a crime. Despite the circumstantial nature of the evidence, the prosecution managed to prove the defendant's guilt. The prosecution's witnesses appeared scared as they recounted their experiences with the real Julian. The jury found Julian salely guilty of premeditated murder. As he left the courtroom, he turned to the victim's family and said something that sounded like a threat. From the very moment Julian found himself behind bars, he began writing endless appeals to challenge the sentence, insisting that he was a victim of bias and incompetence. Probably feeling his helplessness and unbearable situation, he even insulted one of the judges in writing, subsequently refusing to retract his comments, insisting he was a victim of governmental arbitrariness. However, all his requests were rejected. While in prison, he was involved in another incident related to his inability to control his aggression. Using a homemade sharpener, he threatened to kill one of the prison guards, whom he took hostage for several minutes. Julian was eventually overpowered and neutralized. Now, he remains behind bars.